Picture this. You lie in bed at night, eyes open, your body tired, but your mind racing, replaying old conversations, worrying about things you can't fix, feeling like peace is something you have to chase but can never catch. The world is quiet, but inside your head, it's anything but. And deep down, all you want is a moment of true calm, not forced calm, not fake positivity, but real inner stillness. Let's be honest. How often do you go to sleep feeling heavy, anxious, or emotionally drained? How often do you carry pain that doesn't seem to fade, no matter how many deep breaths you take, or how many times you tell yourself to let it go? What if I told you that the soul doesn't need more pressure to be perfect? It needs space to be still. That real healing doesn't come from pushing harder, but from surrendering deeper. And that Buddhism, in its most peaceful and powerful form, can guide you there, not through rules, not through beliefs, but through quiet truths that meet you right where you are, in the middle of the noise. Tonight, you're going to learn the teachings that don't just talk about peace, but actually create it. These are not just lessons, they are soul medicine, gentle practices that loosen the knots in your heart, calm the waves in your thoughts, and allow the real you, the one beneath the worry, beneath the pain, to finally breathe. So, before we begin, do something different. Make a small promise to your inner self. Write in the comments, "Tonight, I let go. I choose peace." Because you're not just typing words, you're starting a new pattern. One where sleep is not escape, but healing. One where stillness becomes strength. And one where every breath you take tonight brings you closer to a soul that finally feels safe. Ready? Let's begin. You've already taken the first step, choosing to give your mind a place to rest instead of fight, to be held instead of hardened. And now, we begin with a lesson that may feel strange at first. It's not loud, it's not forceful, but it may be the most powerful of all, because it's not about filling yourself up, it's about learning how to hold nothing. There's a quiet power in the bowl that stays empty. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't try to prove its worth. And yet, it's ready for anything. That's the soul when it stops clinging to stories. That's the mind when it no longer needs noise to feel alive. In Buddhism, this is known as shunyata, a word often misunderstood as emptiness, when in truth it's a space of emotional safety. A sacred pause, not a hole, but a holding. Most people fear emptiness. They rush to fill it with opinions, with relationships, with drama, with titles and goals and answers. But this endless filling doesn't soothe, it suffocates. It creates a soul that is always overfed but undernourished, always crowded but still lonely, always busy but never truly awake. But when the teachings of shunyata are fully understood, emptiness becomes the place where healing breathes. This emptiness is not the kind that leaves someone hollow. It's the kind that allows stillness to unfold naturally. When you stop trying to be someone, when you stop trying to make every moment mean something, you create space, not the space of absence, but of peace. The soul does not always need to be filled, it needs to be held. And the bowl that holds nothing is never in danger of breaking under pressure. It's light, it's ready, it's free. The reason most people feel anxious isn't because something is missing. It's because too much has been forced in. Every identity clung to becomes a burden. Every expectation becomes a wall. Every story repeated becomes a cage. What happens when the soul stops carrying those? What happens when the stories are put down, the masks fall away, and the questions are allowed to go unanswered? What happens is this: peace slips in like light through an open window, not because it was forced, but because there was room for it. Holding nothing sounds passive, but it's one of the most active choices the mind can make. Because to choose emptiness, one must first unclench the grip on everything that feels familiar: labels, roles, status, even pain. Pain, too, can be something we unknowingly hold tight. It gives us identity. It gives us story. But healing asks something terrifying at first: release. When you hold nothing, you stop defending a version of yourself. You stop trying to convince the world who you are. And in that absence of proving, the real self quietly appears. Not the self built by thought, but the self that exists even without thought. That self doesn't panic in silence. That self doesn't vanish in the dark. That self simply is. And that's enough. To sit in emptiness is to stop feeding the stories that run your life. Stories that say, "I'm not good enough. I need more to feel complete. I must be understood." These stories are like bricks stacked in the bowl of your soul, making you feel heavy, tired, full of noise. Shunyata says, put the bricks down, let the bowl breathe again. This isn't detachment in a cold, distant way. It's the warm detachment of a parent who gently opens their hand and lets the child walk on their own. It's love without control, presence without pressure, awareness without grasping. This is emotional safety, because nothing can truly hurt what is not clinging. In a world obsessed with holding, owning, capturing, and naming, emptiness feels like rebellion. But it's not rebellion against life. It's rebellion against suffering. Most suffering doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the story added to it, the fear of what it means, the resistance to what it feels like. But a bowl that holds nothing doesn't resist. It accepts. It welcomes. And in that space, emotions don't become enemies. They become clouds passing across an open sky. The teachings of Shunyata ask one simple question: what if peace isn't something to find, but something that appears when you stop cluttering the soul? That's the doorway. But to walk through it, one must let go. And letting go is not a one-time act. It's a practice. It's a rhythm. A quiet return to the bowl that doesn't try to catch every drop, but simply lets life pour through. Try this. In your mind, name the expectations you've placed on yourself, the roles you feel you must maintain, the story you think others expect you to live. Hold each one in your awareness. Then imagine setting them down, not rejecting them, not destroying them, just setting them down like coats on a hook. For a moment, let yourself be without them, not because they're bad, but because you're allowed to exist, even without them. Do you feel the stillness that follows? That's Shunyata. That's the bowl returning to its natural state. And in that space, healing doesn't have to be forced. It simply begins. A full bowl has no room for water, but an empty one can receive endlessly. It's ready for rain. It's ready for grace. When you stop filling your life with what you think should be there, you begin to discover what wants to be there naturally. The soul doesn't need more force, it needs more flow. And here's the paradox. The more you try to fill your soul with meaning, the more meaning slips through your fingers. Because meaning is not something to own, it's something to allow. When the bowl is empty, meaning arrives not as a command, but as a whisper. It speaks in the silence. It shows itself when the noise dies down, and it is always gentler than expected. This is why so many who practice deep Buddhist meditation speak of clarity, lightness, even joy, not because they've added something, but because they've removed the walls. They've emptied the bowl, and in doing so, they've discovered that the peace they were chasing was always waiting behind the clutter. Nothingness is not numbness. It is not void. It is the space where presence returns to the body, where breath deepens, and where the soul exhales for the first time in years. In the teachings of the Heart Sutra, the phrase, "Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form," reminds us that emptiness is not separate from life. It is life without the filters. It is life without the weight. It is the soul, unburdened. Emotional safety does not come from controlling every thought, every feeling, every person. It comes from letting those things move through without trapping them in meaning. It comes from trusting that nothing held can ever be more valuable than the freedom of letting go. In daily life, this can look like sitting quietly when a painful memory surfaces and doing nothing, not distracting, not fixing, just allowing it to be, letting it rise and fall without reaction. In that stillness, the pain does something unexpected. It softens, it speaks, and then, often, it passes, like a wave that once looked like it would drown you, but simply kissed your feet. That's the bowl that holds nothing. That's the soul that holds peace. The deeper gift of shunyata is that it makes space for others too. When you no longer need to defend your identity, you don't need to fight others for theirs. When you are not busy proving your worth, you are free to love others without expectation. This is not self-sacrifice. It's self-liberation. It's the kind of presence that creates peace not just for you, but for everyone around you. A bowl that is too full cannot receive the tears of others. A bowl that is empty can hold both joy and sorrow and still remain whole. This emptiness is not a lack. It is a deep readiness, a soul unclenched, a presence undistracted. It does not mean life will be painless, but it does mean that pain will not be another story to carry. It will be an experience that moves through, not one that stays behind and defines. The teachings of shunyata are not cold philosophy. They are warm, quiet truths. They whisper, not shout, but they stay. And over time, they teach the soul how to return to its original shape, a shape that doesn't need edges, borders, or walls, a shape that can hold nothing, and in doing so, hold everything. So tonight, let the bowl rest, let the mind open, let the soul exhale. You are not required to fill anything. You are not required to be anything. You are already enough, just as you are, when all the labels fall away. And that is emotional safety. And now that the soul has begun to understand the quiet power of emptiness, the space where peace doesn't need to be earned or filled, we move to a softer, but equally misunderstood truth. The kind that asks not for silence, but for balance. Not for withdrawal, but for warmth without burning. Because the next step in the journey is not about holding nothing. It's about not holding too tight. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't always look like suffering. It hides behind love, behind hope, behind care. It's the kind that keeps the heart tangled in people, outcomes, and stories, not because it's bad to care, but because the care turned into clinging, and clinging always hurts. In Buddhism, this subtle grip is known as upadana, a word that means grasping, attaching, holding on with a kind of desperation that slowly drains peace from the soul. Most people think detachment means being cold, distant, or emotionless. But that's not wisdom. It's a wound dressed up as strength. Real detachment doesn't numb. It frees. It lets the flame keep glowing, but without setting anything on fire. This is the middle path. The way to love without losing yourself, to feel deeply without drowning, to care without turning care into a chain. Heartbreak, anxiety, and self-doubt are often the symptoms of a deeper pattern, one where the mind starts to believe that peace depends on something or someone staying exactly the way we want. And when that doesn't happen, the emotional grip tightens. The harder we cling, the more painful the release becomes. It's not the letting go that breaks us. It's the holding on too tightly in the first place. So how does one stop grasping without shutting down? It begins with seeing the grasping clearly, not judging it, just noticing it. That moment when a message doesn't come and the heart panics. That second when a plan changes and the mind spins. That feeling of needing someone to validate a choice, or else the soul feels small. That's upadana. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as needing things to make sense right now. Sometimes it's as simple as needing someone to behave the way they used to. The Buddha taught that craving is the root of suffering, but what he really meant is this. Craving is a misunderstanding of where peace comes from. When the soul forgets that peace is its natural state, it starts to chase it in people, status, certainty, and control. But none of those things last. And so the soul keeps chasing, and the more it chases, the more it believes it needs to chase. To break that cycle is not to become indifferent. It's to remember that nothing external can permanently hold peace. It can reflect it. It can awaken it. But it can't keep it. Real peace doesn't live in outcomes. It lives in the space that doesn't grasp. Detachment is not indifference. It's the clarity that sees everything as precious, but not permanent. And in that clarity, the heart softens. When love is allowed to move freely without being forced into staying, it becomes deeper. When fear is allowed to pass through without being pushed away, it becomes gentler. When self-doubt is observed without being obeyed, it becomes quiet. The flame that doesn't burn is still warm. It still lights the way, but it does not destroy. That's the soul when it cares without needing to own. That's the heart when it beats with full feeling but no expectation. Start by looking at the way emotional energy attaches itself. Not with shame, with curiosity. Where does the mind grasp the most? In relationships? In identity? In outcomes? The pattern is always the same. Something is clung to because it feels like a guarantee. But guarantees are illusions. Life is not a contract, it's a flow. One of the most compassionate things someone can do is to stop demanding that life stay the same, that people remain predictable, that love always come with reassurance. Because when those demands fall away, suffering falls with them. There's nothing wrong with wanting love, or stability, or clarity. But the moment they become conditions for peace, the mind begins to suffer. Because the world will not always deliver those things, and it's not supposed to. Life doesn't break its promise when it changes, it fulfills it. This is why the middle path is so powerful. It does not ask the heart to stop feeling. It asks the heart to stop gripping. A gentle hand can still hold. A soft gaze can still see. A light flame can still warm. But none of these cling. None of these control. Heartbreak softens when the story around it loosens. When love is no longer a possession, but a shared experience that was always allowed to end. It hurts, yes, but the pain is clean. It doesn't rot in the corners of resentment. It passes like weather. When clinging is removed, even grief has grace. Anxiety eases when control is released. When outcomes are not measured against self-worth. When the present moment is allowed to simply be without needing to guarantee the next. The anxious mind grips the future. The wise heart comes back to now. Self-doubt dissolves when the soul stops begging for proof. The grasping here is not external, it's internal. A grasping for validation, a grasping for worth. But that worth is never found in comparison or in approval. It's only rediscovered when the need to prove anything is surrendered. The flame that doesn't burn lives in the center of all things. It's the middle path between cold detachment and consuming obsession. It doesn't flicker with the wind. It doesn't lash out in the storm. It remains. Because it was never trying to hold on to anything, it was simply present. This presence is the medicine. When the mind begins to grip, the breath brings it back. When emotions spike, presence soothes without silencing. When people come and go, presence stays with itself. This is how the soul learns not to panic in the face of change, not because change is easy, but because clinging only makes it harder. To walk the middle path is to know that love can exist without ownership, that grief can be felt without resistance, that uncertainty does not require panic, and that peace does not demand perfection. There is strength in letting things be, not out of laziness, out of wisdom, because what stays, stays. What leaves, leaves. And either way, you remain enough. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means stopping the battle that was never yours to fight. It means sitting with the open hand, not the clenched fist. It means breathing through the ache without feeding it stories. It means being tender with life, without needing it to bow to your terms. Emotional clinging is not always obvious. It often hides behind effort. I'm just trying to fix things. I just want to help. I just need closure. But when help turns to control, when care turns to fear, when closure becomes a trap, the soul begins to lose its softness. The teachings of Upadana remind us to check the energy behind the effort. Is it love, or is it fear dressed as love? Is it care, or is it a deep discomfort with not knowing? The flame that doesn't burn asks us to sit in those questions, not to judge, but to see, because in seeing, grasping loses its grip. You can still want connection and not chase it. You can still feel pain and not let it define you. You can still act with intention, not impulse. The soul that learns this becomes calm, not by shutting down, but by becoming fully awake. So what do you do when you feel the urge to grasp? Pause, breathe, name it gently. Not, why am I like this? But, I'm gripping again. That's okay. Let me soften. That small act of naming creates space. That space is the beginning of release. And when the mind starts to replay, to rehearse, to seek reassurance, meet it with compassion. Say to it what a wise teacher would say to a worried student. You don't need to figure it all out right now. You're safe, even if things are uncertain. That's the flame. It stays warm. It stays steady. It doesn't burn itself out, trying to control what was never in its hands. And in that still glow, the soul begins to rest. Let the flame teach you. Let it show you that peace is not passive, it's powerful. That letting go is not weakness, it's the deepest kind of strength. And that your worth does not rise and fall based on how tightly you hold things. It rises when you return to center. It rises when you let go with love. And now that the grip has loosened, now that the soul has felt what it means to stay warm without holding too tightly, the next layer of peace begins to appear, not as something to earn, but as something that has always been quietly present, beneath every word, beneath every emotion, beneath even the act of letting go. It's not silence as most people know it. It's a second heartbeat, a deeper rhythm, one that doesn't need explanation, one that doesn't need to be heard to be felt. This kind of silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of struggle. The world may still be loud, thoughts may still come and go, but beneath them there is a space that doesn't flinch, a pulse that doesn't rush, a peace that isn't scared by noise because it doesn't depend on quiet. Noble silence, in Buddhist tradition, is not just a practice. It's a way of returning to truth. Not because words are wrong, but because words can only point. They can't replace presence. And presence is what heals, not through what it says, but through what it allows. Real silence is not escape. It's contact. Contact with the self, with reality, with what the mind usually runs from. The mind is addicted to reacting, to naming, to controlling through language. But most suffering cannot be solved with better sentences. It dissolves when the story stops being told, when the inner narrator pauses, and in that pause, something opens, a deeper knowing, a wiser awareness, not forced, not created, simply uncovered. This is why silence has always been considered sacred in spiritual paths. Because in silence, nothing new is added, but everything begins to settle. Like muddy water left untouched, the clarity comes not from action, but from stillness. That's what noble silence does to the subconscious. It doesn't wrestle with it. It calms it by not feeding it. When a person sits in noble silence, the first thing they notice is discomfort. The urge to speak, to distract, to solve something. That discomfort is not the enemy. It's the surface noise. It's the backlog of everything unprocessed. But if one stays, if one lets the silence deepen, the noise starts to unwind. The nervous system recalibrates. The mind stops looking for drama, and the heart starts to remember how to simply beat. There is a silence that makes people feel awkward. Then there is a silence that makes people feel safe. The first is a gap. The second is a presence. Noble silence becomes that presence, not empty, not frozen, but deeply alive. Because when speech is removed, so is performance, so is pretending, and the soul no longer has to explain itself to be enough. Healing happens faster in silence. Not because time moves differently, but because the mind stops interrupting the process. Most emotional pain is replayed pain, retold pain. Pain that doesn't get a chance to breathe because it's always being narrated. Noble silence gives the pain air. It gives the mind rest. It gives the body space to process without the pressure to understand. When a person stops talking, even just for a few hours, their awareness shifts. Sounds become more vivid. Breath becomes more intimate. Emotions rise more honestly. The mask of personality softens. This is not withdrawal from life. This is stepping into it more fully, without the shield of language, without the armor of small talk, without the need to justify anything. Noble silence isn't just about not speaking to others. It's about not speaking to yourself in the usual way. The inner monologue begins to quiet, and what's left is raw presence, pure attention. It may be unfamiliar at first, but it's not scary. It's home. The silence that heals is not indifferent. It's deeply loving. It listens without interrupting. It holds space without trying to fix. It invites you to sit, to stay, to soften. There is no performance in this silence, no proving, no comparison, only being. And in being, the layers of self that were built on noise start to fall away. For those who carry anxiety, silence can be confronting, because anxiety thrives on stimulation, on activity, on solving things before they happen. But when one sits in noble silence, anxiety is met with a different energy, an energy that doesn't match its pace, an energy that doesn't argue, doesn't fight, doesn't validate the urgency, and in that mismatch, anxiety begins to dissolve, not because it's silenced, but because it's no longer being fed. The subconscious mind speaks in feelings, images, sensations, not words. That's why silence is such a direct language for the soul. When you sit quietly, without distraction, the body begins to release what it's been holding, not with effort, just with time. Tears may come, laughter may rise, old emotions may visit, but none of it needs to be analyzed. All of it just wants to be felt, and then let go. There's a kind of relief that comes when the pressure to explain yourself disappears, when no one expects words, when even your own thoughts are allowed to be quiet. That relief is the body sighing. It's the soul saying, "Thank you, I've been waiting." People often look for peace in things to add, techniques, practices, knowledge. But the kind of peace noble silence brings isn't something you gain. It's what's revealed when nothing else is in the way. The same way stars are always there, but only visible when the sky grows still. The more you practice noble silence, the more the mind learns to stop interrupting the present moment. You begin to notice the patterns, the instant reactions, the habitual stories. And in noticing, you get a choice, a moment of freedom. Do I keep reacting this way, or do I stay with the breath and let it pass? This moment, this pause, is the second heartbeat. It's the space between stimulus and response, the space where awareness grows, the space where healing starts. Because every time you respond from that second heartbeat, instead of your first reaction, you build a new rhythm, a rhythm that isn't based on survival, but on peace. Noble silence is not always about long retreats or full days of no speaking. It can begin in small, sacred ways. A walk without music, a morning without screens, a meal without talking, a moment of breath before replying. Each one is a doorway. Each one teaches the nervous system to soften, the mind to pause, the soul to lead. In relationships, silence teaches presence. When two people sit together without words and still feel connection, that is depth, that is truth. Because when love doesn't need to be spoken every second, it becomes something more permanent, something that exists beneath language. In conflict, silence becomes protection, not the silence that punishes, but the silence that pauses so words don't become weapons, so emotions don't get pushed into actions that leave regret. This kind of silence is not passive, it's powerful. It interrupts the pattern, it slows down the storm, it makes space for understanding to enter. In grief, silence becomes a holding, a gentle cradle. Because there are no words that can fix what has been lost, but there is presence, there is breath. There is the quiet company of someone who doesn't need to say anything to love deeply, and in joy, silence becomes awe. The moment when laughter fades into quiet gratitude, when the beauty of life becomes too full for language, when the soul simply says, "This, just this, that's enough." Practicing noble silence rewires the nervous system. It changes the baseline from tension to ease, from urgency to patience, from story to awareness. Over time, the mind stops needing to explain everything, the heart stops needing to be loud, and the body starts to trust silence as a home, not a threat. Some people fear silence because they equate it with loneliness. But loneliness is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of connection. And noble silence is pure connection, to breath, to life, to being. It doesn't separate you from others, it returns you to yourself. And in returning, you become more available, more present, more real. This is why teachers throughout history have said the most profound truths are spoken without words. Because what the soul most needs is not another explanation, but an experience. And silence is the most honest experience of all. So when your thoughts grow loud, don't fight them. Sit with them. Breathe with them. Let them rise and fall without feeding them more story. And when your emotions feel big, don't shrink them with words. Let the silence hold them. Let the breath meet them. Let the body process what the mind cannot explain. This is the power of the second heartbeat. It keeps beating even when everything else goes still. It keeps guiding even when the mind forgets. It is not separate from life. It is the foundation of it. And the more you return to it, the more you begin to realize that peace has never been far. It has only been quiet. Let this silence become a friend, not one that fixes, but one that stays. one that doesn't rush, one that knows presence is the greatest comfort of all. From the stillness that breathes without words, from the deep presence that doesn't need sound to feel full, something begins to stir again, not as disruption, but as motion. Life doesn't stay quiet forever. It moves, it shifts, it pulls and releases. And just like breath returns after silence, change returns after peace. But now the soul is ready. Now the mind doesn't fear what flows. Now it's time to understand the truth of impermanence, not as loss, but as freedom. The wind has no home. It touches everything but belongs nowhere. It arrives and disappears without asking for permission, and that is the nature of life. The Buddha called it anicca, the constant change that defines all things. People suffer not because things change, but because they expect them not to, because they try to build permanence where there was never supposed to be any. And when that illusion cracks, the pain rushes in, not from the change itself, but from the resistance to it. Loss hurts, regret lingers, restlessness wears down the heart. But each of these carries a misunderstanding that something should have lasted longer, stayed the same, gone differently. The deeper truth is this: nothing ever stays. And when that is no longer a threat, it becomes a release. Anicca is not just a concept. It's a direct experience. It is felt in every breath that enters and leaves the body, in every heartbeat that rises and fades, in every person who walks into your life and eventually walks out. It's not cruel, it's just true. And truth, when met fully, always sets something free. When someone sees change as the enemy, life becomes a battlefield. Every wrinkle is an attack. Every goodbye is a wound. Every shift in routine is a problem to fix. But when change is accepted as the nature of things, those same events become something else. They become part of the dance, part of the rhythm, part of the lesson. This isn't about pretending that change feels good all the time. It doesn't. Grief is real. Heartbreak stings. Letting go can feel like dying. But what softens suffering is knowing that even the pain won't last forever, that even sorrow is part of the motion, that even the deepest ache is held within the same flow that eventually carries it away. Holding on tightly creates the illusion of safety. But that grip is what breaks the heart. Because the world will move, people will evolve, bodies will change, plans will fall apart, and the only peace that lasts is the peace that doesn't resist that motion. The wind has no home, but it doesn't apologize for moving. It doesn't ask the trees to stay still. It doesn't worry about where it came from or where it's going. It just flows, and the soul, when it remembers this, becomes light. It stops carrying what it cannot keep. It starts moving with what it cannot control. That's not helplessness. That's wisdom. In the practice of anicca, one starts by watching. Watch how feelings come and go. Joy never stays. Neither does fear. Watch how thoughts flicker in and out. Even the most stubborn belief is just a wave passing through. Watch how people shift, how even those who love you change shape over time, not because they want to, but because that's what life does. And when you start to see this, the heart begins to relax. It no longer tries to freeze time. It no longer panics at the first sign of difference. It starts to trust that nothing needs to stay the same for peace to be real. Letting go doesn't always mean saying goodbye. Sometimes it just means loosening the grip, allowing what is here now to be fully appreciated without needing to hold on to it forever. When you stop trying to preserve moments like trophies, you start living them more fully. When you know something won't last, you see it more clearly, love it more honestly, and release it more gently. Restlessness often comes from trying to outrun change, from thinking that there's some perfect place where everything will finally stop shifting. But such a place does not exist. And that's not a failure, it's a gift. Because when you stop waiting for things to settle, you begin settling into yourself. The practice of peace is not about finding still ground in the world. It's about finding steady awareness within, so that no matter how much life moves, you don't get thrown. You flow with it. You don't need to anchor to outcomes. You become the space that holds all outcomes with grace. Regret softens when you see that even mistakes are part of the changing current. What felt like a failure once might have been the only doorway that could open something deeper. Holding on to the past doesn't preserve it, it distorts it, but allowing it to pass makes room for understanding, for forgiveness, for the next breath. Loss begins to feel different too, not smaller, but more sacred, because instead of clinging to what left, the soul begins to bow to what was, to say thank you, to feel deeply, and to trust that every ending carries the seed of something unseen. Not better, just next. This doesn't mean that attachment disappears overnight, but it does mean the heart begins to let life pass through more gently, less grasping, more noticing, less controlling, more honoring. That shift creates a new kind of safety, one that isn't dependent on anything staying, one that knows peace is not at the end of change, it's within it. Anika teaches that identity too is fluid. Who you were 10 years ago is not who you are now, and who you are now will not stay. That's not a problem, that's evolution. When the mind stops trying to pin down a fixed self, it starts to relax into growth. It stops defending stories that no longer fit. It starts becoming more honest, more open, more alive. The fear of change is often the fear of disappearing, of not recognizing oneself. But the self was never a fixed thing. It was always a collection of shifting patterns, thoughts, emotions. When the soul releases the pressure to stay consistent, it finds a deeper consistency, a presence that watches it all come and go. This is why the wind is such a powerful teacher. It reminds us that movement is not the opposite of peace, it's the expression of it. When you stop needing to settle everything, you begin to dance. You begin to feel the joy of living in a world that is never the same twice. A world that cannot be trapped or controlled, but can be loved exactly as it is. In practice, this might mean meeting each day with a little less resistance, greeting new emotions with less panic, watching things change without telling yourself it's wrong. It means trusting the process more than the plan, trusting the unfolding more than the explanation, trusting that even when things fall apart, something real remains. That something is awareness, the witness, the one inside who doesn't break when things change because it never depended on things staying the same. That's the soul's true strength, not in holding, but in adapting, not in control, but in surrender. This doesn't mean giving up. It means giving in to the truth of flow. It means acting with presence instead of panic, loving without needing a guarantee, living without needing a script. When the soul does this, it stops being a victim of life. It becomes part of it. And yes, there will still be grief, still be longing, still be those moments when you wish something could have lasted just a little longer. But even then, the grief becomes lighter when it's not tangled in the lie that it should have been different. When you stop asking life to freeze, it starts holding you better. The wind has no home, but it touches everything, and so can you. Not by owning, but by honoring, not by grabbing, but by being present. That presence leaves no damage. It leaves depth. It leaves clarity. It leaves love. So when things change, and they will, pause, breathe. Remember that this is not the end of peace. It's the shape peace takes when it flows. When the heart feels afraid, don't tell it to be stronger. Sit with it, walk with it, let it tremble without judgment. And then, when it's ready, let it move again. This is the truth of impermanence, not cold, not distant, but deeply kind, because it teaches you to live while you're here, to love while it lasts, to feel without fear, and to let everything pass through without becoming trapped in the need for forever. From this understanding, something deep opens, a new kind of resilience, not hard, not heavy, but soft and steady. And in that softness, the soul finds rest, not because life stopped moving, but because it finally stopped resisting the wind. And now that the soul has stopped fighting the wind, now that it no longer begs life to stay still, but begins to flow with the natural movement of things, the next truth reveals itself, not in force, not in resistance, but in the quiet strength of letting go. If the wind teaches how to move with change, then water teaches how to stay soft in the middle of storms. There is power in not fighting. There is courage in surrender. There is resilience that doesn't harden, but deepens. Most people grow up being taught that strength is about holding tight, holding your emotions, holding your position, holding your pride. But what if the real strength is in allowing, in opening to what hurts instead of bracing against it, in letting feelings move through rather than letting them build up pressure and explode? Buddhism speaks to this in ways that don't shout. They whisper, they show rather than explain. And what they show is this: the strongest energy in the world is the one that flows without force, like water. Water never argues with the stone. It doesn't try to break through it. It doesn't rush to defeat it. It simply moves around it, over it, under it, until slowly, sometimes invisibly, it reshapes even the hardest surface. That's what soft resilience looks like. That's what the heart can do when it no longer needs to win against emotion, but simply let it pass. Surrender is often misunderstood. It's not giving up. It's giving in to what's real, to what's already here, to what the moment is offering without resistance. The mind often tries to resist what it doesn't like, thinking that pushing back will solve the discomfort. But pain that is resisted grows sharper. Emotions that are suppressed grow louder. The real healing begins when resistance ends. To allow an emotion is not to approve of it, it's to give it space. Every feeling that rises, anger, sadness, fear, wants one thing: to be felt and then to go. When it is blocked, it becomes stuck. When it is judged, it becomes twisted. But when it is witnessed and allowed, it begins to move, just like water. This doesn't mean collapsing into every emotion that comes. It means being present with it, watching it, feeling it without letting it take the wheel. Think of it as being the riverbank, not the river. The emotion flows, but it doesn't carry you away. You remain steady, but not rigid. You remain present, but not passive. Most emotional suffering comes not from the feeling itself, but from the inner battle against it. The story that says, "I shouldn't be feeling this," or "This is too much," or "If I let this in, I'll lose control." But the truth is, letting the feeling in is how control returns. Not control over the world. Control over how you respond to it. Soft resilience is a skill. It begins with noticing. When something triggers pain, pause, breathe. Instead of reacting, feel the sensation in the body. Where is it? What is its shape, its texture, its temperature? Don't analyze it. Don't argue with it. Just let it be there. As if you were holding a guest in your home who doesn't need to stay forever, but deserves to be welcomed with respect. The body knows how to process emotions when the mind stops interfering. Tears that rise without permission often do more healing than hours of analysis. Sighs that come from deep in the chest release more tension than explaining why you're tired. The body is not trying to betray you, it's trying to bring balance. But it needs your permission to let the energy move. Think of a time when you pushed a feeling away. Did it disappear, or did it come back stronger later, in a moment when you least expected it? That's how emotions work. What isn't allowed in knocks harder. What isn't met with softness returns as force, but when you meet it with openness, it begins to soften on its own. There is a moment in every emotional wave where the temptation to tense up appears, to run, to numb, to distract. But if you can stay just a few seconds longer, stay with the breath, stay with the sensation, you begin to feel the shape of it changing. It doesn't need to be fixed, it just needs to be moved through. Water doesn't get stuck unless something blocks it. You are the same. Soft resilience is about moving through, not getting over, not getting around. Through. And through means going in, staying present, and letting the feeling have its life cycle without trying to control its timing. Some emotions pass quickly, others take their time, but all of them move faster when they're not being fought. This kind of surrender doesn't make you weak, it makes you grounded, because now, even when strong feelings come, you don't collapse. You stay, you witness, you breathe. And that teaches the nervous system that it's safe to feel, that it's safe to be alive, that not every discomfort is a crisis, that not every wave needs a wall. There's another truth in this practice. When you stop fighting your own pain, you also stop fighting other people. Compassion grows where resistance ends. When you know what it feels like to sit with your own grief, your heart opens to the grief of others, not to save them, but to be with them without panic. That's the real gift of this path. It makes you softer toward the world. Even in moments of conflict, soft resilience helps. When someone attacks, your instinct might be to push back. But if you respond from presence instead of protection, you change the energy. You stop the cycle. You become like water again, unshaken, unbroken, deeply aware. Some days, soft resilience means doing nothing at all, letting yourself rest when the world says, hustle, saying no when your body says it's too much. choosing stillness over productivity. These are not acts of laziness. They are acts of alignment. They are how the soul stays connected to truth, not to performance. Even in healing, this approach matters. You don't have to dig for every wound. You don't have to force insight. Sometimes healing happens in the background when you're not pushing, when you're just being kind to yourself, when you're letting the water do what it does best: cleanse, carry, soften. Non-resistance doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care wisely. You allow life to show up as it is without always needing to shape it. You meet each moment with presence, not pressure. And that presence is powerful. It's the kind of strength that doesn't make noise but changes everything. One of the most misunderstood ideas in emotional work is the need to constantly process, talk, analyze. But sometimes the soul doesn't need more words. It needs space. Space to feel, space to breathe, space to exist without being edited. That's what soft resilience offers, a kind of gentle room for your own humanity. And when you give yourself that, something magical happens. The emotions that once felt overwhelming begin to feel more like waves than walls. You still feel them, but they don't knock you down. You still notice them, but they don't define you. You still experience the rise and fall, but you don't disappear with them. That's the power of surrender, not as giving up, but as giving way. Letting life move through you instead of locking it out. Letting the heart feel instead of freezing. Letting the soul breathe instead of bracing. The teachings of the Buddha were not about avoidance. They were about awareness. They were not about toughness. They were about truth. And the truth is, being human means feeling things deeply, fully, honestly. But those feelings don't have to control you. When they're allowed, they pass. When they're held, they soften. When they're honored, they teach. So if today your heart feels heavy, don't try to be brave in the old way. Try something different. Let yourself lean. Let yourself melt. Let yourself be water. Not so you can disappear, but so you can flow. And in that flowing, find the strength that never needed armor, the kind that doesn't fight the stone, but wears it down, one gentle breath at a time. And now that the soul has learned to flow like water, to stay soft without collapsing, to surrender without becoming passive, a deeper invitation appears. One that doesn't ask you to move, shift, or even open. It simply asks you to watch. Because in the space between reaction and repression, there's a third path, the path of quiet witnessing. The moon follows this path. It sees everything. It shines through everything, but it never interferes. That is the next doorway to peace. There is a kind of presence that doesn't speak, a kind of awareness that doesn't choose sides. It just watches. This is choiceless awareness. It's not about changing how you feel. It's about being with what is. When pain rises, this awareness doesn't call it good or bad. It doesn't try to solve it or push it away. It holds it like the moon holds the sky, without flinching, without clinging. Most people were never taught how to witness emotions. They were taught to control them, fix them, hide them, or act on them. But true inner peace doesn't come from controlling what you feel. It comes from no longer being controlled by what you feel. That begins with seeing clearly, without judgment, without story, without resistance. When you practice choiceless awareness, you become the observer instead of the reactor. Anger may rise, but you don't become the anger. Sadness may move through, but you don't drown in it. Even joy, when held in this space, becomes lighter, not because it disappears, but because it doesn't need to be held tightly. Every emotion is allowed. None are rejected. All are witnessed. This witnessing is not passive. It's deeply active. It takes strength to sit with discomfort and not escape it. It takes clarity to feel something powerful and not reach for a distraction. It takes compassion to notice your own struggle and not immediately try to fix it. But this is how the healing begins, not by doing more, but by seeing more. Start with the breath. Every breath in is a chance to notice. Every breath out is a chance to release the urge to change what you notice. Let the awareness rest like moonlight, soft, steady, illuminating. No agenda, no resistance, just presence. Thoughts will still come. That's not a problem. Let them pass. Let them swirl. Let them run their loops without grabbing hold. The same goes for emotions. They may feel sharp. They may feel sticky. But choiceless awareness doesn't grab them. It doesn't push them away either. It simply lets them be what they are and watches. This kind of presence creates a gap, a space between the emotion and the action. In that space, something new can appear: wisdom, patience, understanding. But most importantly, in that space, the emotion begins to lose its grip. Because emotions grow stronger when they're fed with stories. When they're met with silence, they soften. Watching without judging creates emotional safety. The nervous system learns that not every feeling is a threat. The body starts to trust that it doesn't have to go into defense mode every time a thought or emotion arises. And over time, this practice builds resilience, not through force, but through quiet familiarity. The more you witness your inner world without flinching, the less power it has over you. Choiceless awareness also breaks patterns. When the same emotion shows up again and again, resentment, insecurity, panic, it's often because it's been fed by habit, by the same reaction, by the same interpretation. But when you just watch it, without feeding it, something starts to change. The pattern unravels. The emotion doesn't know what to do when it's not getting a reaction, so it begins to settle. Even painful memories lose their sting when witnessed with enough stillness, not when they're analyzed, not when they're buried, but when they're held in awareness with no need to change them, just held. Like clouds drifting across a night sky, they are seen, they are allowed, and then they move on. There's a softness in this kind of attention. It doesn't try to diagnose, it doesn't rush to conclusions. It waits, it listens. And in that listening, a different kind of healing takes place. One that isn't made by force, but by acceptance. Most of the time, judgment isn't even conscious. It slips in as a label. I shouldn't feel this. This means I'm broken. That thought is wrong. These labels don't help. They trap. Choiceless awareness removes the labels. It just says, this is here. That's all. Not forever. Not right or wrong. Just present. And that kind of seeing is enough. When the soul is seen without needing to perform, something softens. When pain is allowed to be seen without being fixed, something opens. That's the real gift of this practice. It's not about control, it's about contact. You are no longer avoiding yourself. You are meeting yourself fully, gently, honestly. Over time, this practice begins to move into daily life. In moments of stress, you start noticing before reacting. In moments of joy, you start savoring without clinging. In moments of uncertainty, you begin to trust the space instead of rushing to fill it. And in all moments, you start to feel more like the sky, open, clear, and able to hold whatever appears. This doesn't mean you never feel overwhelmed. It means the overwhelm doesn't define you. It doesn't control your next move. It's seen, it's felt, but it's not obeyed. That's the difference between being trapped in emotion and being in relationship with it. One controls you, the other simply passes through. When witnessing becomes your default, your relationships change too. You start listening more deeply, reacting less quickly, judging less harshly, because the same space you create inside for your own emotions naturally extends outward. You start to see others not as problems to solve, but as beings to be present with. That shift alone can change everything. And in solitude, this awareness becomes even more powerful. You stop needing noise to feel safe. You stop needing distraction to feel alive. You stop needing constant validation to feel worthy. Because when you can sit quietly and witness your own life, your own pain, your own joy, your own breath, you realize you are already whole. This practice also protects you, not by building walls, but by showing you what's real. When someone tries to pull you into their storm, choiceless awareness helps you stay anchored. You feel their energy, but you don't absorb it. You see their pain, but you don't confuse it with your own. That's not detachment. That's presence with boundaries. And when something inside you wants to panic, to explode, to numb, this awareness becomes your anchor. You feel the urge. You don't act on it. You don't shame it. You just see it. And often, that seeing is enough to shift the whole experience. There is a deeper kind of confidence that grows from this practice. Not the kind built on certainty or perfection, but the kind that knows how to sit in the fire without burning. That knows how to stay centered even when everything around you shakes. That knows how to be fully present without needing to control a single thing. Because the truth is, peace isn't the absence of emotion. It's the presence of awareness. And when awareness watches without choosing, without controlling, without labeling, that's where the real peace begins. That's where the moon lives. Quiet, steady, untouched. So next time a wave rises in you, don't fight it. Don't name it. Don't run from it. Just sit. Just breathe. Just watch. You don't need to understand it to be present with it. You don't need to fix it to honor it. You just need to stay long enough to let it show you what it really is. Not a problem, not a failure, not a weakness. Just a part of the sky passing through. Let yourself be the moon. Let yourself witness it all. The storms, the softness, the ache, the light. Let it pass. Let it return. Let it be. And now that the soul has learned to watch without judging, to sit in the presence of emotion without reacting or running, a different kind of truth begins to rise, one that doesn't push, doesn't climb, doesn't rush. A truth that asks not for more effort, but for deeper trust. Because there is a kind of growth that doesn't shout or stretch, it unfolds quietly. The most lasting transformation happens not in the storm, but in the stillness. That's where the tree grows roots. There is a common belief that healing must be hard, that growth must be loud, that progress must come with sweat and struggle. But not all progress looks like movement. In Wu-Wei style Buddhism, there's a different kind of wisdom, one that flows without force. Wu-Wei means non-doing or effortless action. It doesn't mean being inactive. It means acting in harmony with nature, in rhythm with life, without resistance, without tension. It is the way of the tree that doesn't chase the sun, but grows into it. Real healing doesn't happen on command. The mind can't rush it. The heart can't schedule it. Healing is organic. It moves through stillness, through breath, through quiet surrender. When the soul stops trying to force progress, something begins to shift beneath the surface. Roots deepen, grounding begins. That's where real growth lives, not in trying to be more, but in fully being where you are. Most people confuse growth with achievement. They set goals, make plans, measure outcomes. But healing doesn't care about goals. It cares about space. When you give yourself space, not just physical space, but emotional room, spiritual openness, you allow healing to come on its own terms, like soil that doesn't demand the seed to sprout, but simply holds it with warmth and patience. Stillness isn't the absence of movement, it's the fullness of presence. And in that presence, the body relaxes, the nervous system resets, the breath deepens. That's not laziness, that's restoration. It's the preparation for something new to rise, not through effort, but through nourishment. There is a kind of intelligence in your system that knows how to heal. A cut closes without instruction. A wound scabs without effort. The same is true for the emotional body, but only when it's not being pulled in every direction, only when it's not being shouted at, only when it's not being forced to perform. Stillness allows the system to repair itself, without plans, without pressure. Wu-Wei teaches that the more natural your path, the more powerful your transformation. When you stop trying to be who you think you should be, you make room for who you really are. That space creates conditions for something honest to grow. Not an identity, not a performance, but a grounded, peaceful sense of being that doesn't need to be explained. The tree grows not by running toward the sky, but by rooting deeply into the earth. That's what stillness offers. A chance to go downward before upward. A chance to nourish the foundation before reaching for the light. This process can't be rushed, and it doesn't always feel dramatic. But it's the kind of growth that doesn't break when the wind returns. When you live from Wu-Wei, action becomes softer. Decisions come with less stress. You begin to feel when something is ready, rather than pushing it before it's ripe. You stop trying to fix everything and start listening more closely. You stop trying to be better and start being more real. That shift alone can change your entire relationship with yourself. In a world obsessed with hustle and progress, this path may feel unfamiliar, but it's not passive, it's precise. It asks you to be so in tune with your inner state that you act only when it's aligned. You speak only when it's clear. You move only when it's time. This isn't delay. It's wisdom. It's knowing that some things need silence to grow. There's a phrase in Eastern thought that says, "The sage does nothing, yet nothing is left undone." That's not a riddle. It's a reminder. When your actions arise from deep stillness, They carry more power, more clarity, less friction. You stop spinning your wheels, you start walking your path with ease. You begin to notice how much energy goes into trying to heal faster, trying to feel different, trying to understand. And you realize that all that effort doesn't bring peace, it brings exhaustion. Wu Wei shows you a different way. It says, let the breath guide you, let the feeling rise and fall, let the body speak, let the spirit rest. This way of living isn't about abandoning effort. It's about trusting timing, trusting the intelligence of the process, trusting that the soul doesn't need constant management to evolve. It needs permission. Permission to be messy, to be slow, to be still. In stillness, emotions unfold, not dramatically, not always visibly, but they release their weight. The heart doesn't have to force forgiveness. It comes when it's ready. The mind doesn't have to force clarity. It arrives in its own time. Growth becomes something you witness, not something you manufacture. This kind of growth is gentle, but it's not weak. It's what allows a tree to stand through decades of storms, because its strength wasn't built in reaction. It was built in stillness. Its power wasn't borrowed. It was grown slowly, quietly, in places no one could see. That's how your healing begins to work, when you stop rushing it. In this way of being, even rest becomes sacred. Rest is not what you do when you're done. Rest is what allows you to begin. Rest is where integration happens, where the soul puts down what it's been carrying and finally says, I'm not behind, I'm not broken, I'm just becoming. Stillness becomes a mirror. It shows you what's real, what's needed, what's been avoided. It's not always comfortable, but it's always honest. And in that honesty, you stop chasing answers. You start receiving insights. Insights that aren't from thought, but from knowing. This kind of knowing doesn't speak in words. It speaks in peace. It speaks in the calm that rises after a long breath, in the clarity that comes when you're no longer trying to impress anyone, in the strength that appears when you stop trying to be strong. Wu Wei invites you to let go of striving, to stop measuring, to stop watching the clock, to stop turning your healing into a project. It asks you to return to simplicity, to quiet mornings, to gentle evenings, to soft pauses where you ask nothing of yourself except to be present. And in that presence, things shift. Without force, without a checklist, without applause. The soul begins to find its rhythm again. The body starts to feel like home again. The mind starts to trust the silence again. This path isn't about doing less. It's about doing with less tension, less fear, less doubt. You still act, but your actions come from alignment, not anxiety. You still speak, but your words come from stillness, not stress. You still grow, but your growth comes from peace, not panic. So let yourself root, let yourself rest, let yourself not know. There is wisdom in not knowing, in waiting, in being. The deepest healing you'll ever experience may not feel like healing at all. It may feel like a quiet morning, a soft tear, a single breath that says, I'm here. Let your life be like the tree, growing even when no one sees it, rooting deeper every time you pause, stretching gently, not because you pushed, but because you allowed. and let your stillness be the soil, the place where everything begins and nothing has to be rushed. And now that the roots have settled into stillness, now that growth is no longer forced but allowed, the journey brings us to a deeper kind of presence, one that doesn't hide, one that doesn't look away. Because stillness creates the safety needed to see clearly. And there comes a moment in every path toward peace when you must turn inward, not to judge, not to punish, but to understand. This is the mirror that doesn't flinch. True introspection is not dramatic. It's not filled with self-blame or over-analysis. It is quiet, honest seeing. In Buddhist practice, it's the foundation for inner freedom. You don't grow by avoiding what's inside. You grow by seeing it clearly and staying present with what you see. Most people carry layers of emotional armor, defenses built from shame, fear, comparison, and the stories they tell to survive. But that armor is heavy, and it keeps them from truly meeting themselves. The mirror that doesn't flinch is not a mirror of criticism. It reflects what's there without distortion. It doesn't tell stories, it shows patterns. It doesn't judge emotions, it reveals them. And the more gently you learn to stand in front of that mirror, the more peacefully you begin to live. Buddhist introspection isn't about breaking yourself down, it's about removing the filters that twist your self-image into something false. The ones that say, you're too much, or not enough, or stuck. When those filters fade, you begin to meet the person beneath the story. Not perfect, but real. This level of seeing is soft but strong. It doesn't need a spotlight, it only needs honesty. And honesty, when held with compassion, becomes clarity. That clarity is what begins to ease the soul, not because everything becomes pleasant, but because everything becomes real. To begin, you have to become quiet enough to notice what usually stays hidden. Not just your surface reactions, but the deeper beliefs driving them. When you snap at someone, what fear was behind that? When you overthink, what need is trying to protect you? Introspection isn't asking why to punish yourself. It's asking why to make peace with yourself. When you look in the mirror without flinching, you see the fear that hides behind control, the longing behind the anger, the sadness buried beneath indifference. Most of what we call personality is really just protection. And when protection is no longer needed, the authentic self begins to rise. This practice requires a kind of inner silence. You can't see clearly if the inner critic is yelling. You can't hear the truth if you're narrating the story as it unfolds. That's why Buddhist self-inquiry is slow. It moves with breath, not thought. It doesn't jump to conclusions. It rests in observation. Self-confrontation doesn't mean confrontation in the way we normally use the word. It's not aggressive. It's not combative. It's simply facing what's there without running. The emotion, the memory, the pattern. Whatever it is, you face it like you would a friend in pain, with presence, not pressure. And when shame rises, as it often does in this process, the key is not to argue with it. The key is to soften around it, to hold it in awareness and say, you can be here, you don't define me, but I see you. This takes the sting out of it, because shame can't survive in clear, compassionate seeing. It only grows in secrecy and silence. The mirror shows you the parts you've rejected, but it also shows you the strength that's been there all along. The quiet endurance, the small acts of love, the courage to keep going when everything inside wanted to stop. When you learn to see both the shadow and the light without turning away, a deeper kind of peace appears. One not based on performance, but on truth. In Buddhist psychology, this process is known as vipassana, clear seeing. It's the art of looking at your internal world without distortion, without getting caught in the emotion, without clinging to the thought, just seeing, as if you were watching clouds move across the sky. You begin to notice how much of your pain doesn't come from the emotion itself, but from the resistance to it, the story about it, the identity built around it. When you drop those layers, you're left with something simpler. A feeling, a thought, a habit. And all of these can shift once they're seen clearly. This kind of inner honesty doesn't make you smaller, it makes you lighter. Because denial is heavy, pretending is exhausting. Carrying around a version of yourself that isn't real takes more energy than you think. When you drop that version, even if just for a moment, relief rushes in. And in that relief, there's room for self-kindness. People often think that being honest with yourself means being hard on yourself. But that's only true if your honesty is mixed with shame. When you remove the shame, the honesty becomes healing. It becomes the way you stop repeating the same wounds, the way you stop being afraid of your own reflection. This practice teaches you to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it, to sit with guilt and not spiral into self-hate, to sit with insecurity and not collapse under it, just to sit and breathe and notice. When you can do that, you no longer fear your inner world, and that dissolves so much unnecessary pain. The mirror also shows you what is not yours. You begin to see the beliefs you inherited, the fears that were taught to you, the behaviors you copied because you didn't know there was another way. And suddenly, you have a choice, not just to see it, but to release it. But this release doesn't come through rejection. It comes through understanding. You don't need to fight your past to let go of it. You just need to stop identifying with it. Stop carrying it as if it's the only truth. The mirror teaches this, not by changing the reflection, but by helping you stop mistaking the reflection for the whole story. You also begin to see your contradictions, the ways you long for love but push it away, the way you want to be seen but hide, the way you want to heal but keep running. These contradictions aren't flaws, they're signals. They point to where healing wants to happen. And when the soul is ready, the mirror shows you the innocence underneath the confusion, the part of you that tried to protect yourself the only way you knew how. That part is not the enemy. It is the beginning of your freedom. When you see it, not with blame, but with compassion, you begin to reclaim your softness. This softness is not weakness, it's presence without judgment. It's the ability to feel without collapsing. It's the strength to look at your own face and not turn away. Most people can't do that, not because they lack courage, but because they were never taught how to look gently. Buddhist introspection teaches you to do just that, to look gently, to look fully, to look until the fear melts into tenderness, until the anger softens into sadness, until the sadness dissolves into clarity. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about seeing yourself clearly, fully, lovingly. In time, this seeing becomes familiar. less scary, more supportive, and you start to trust your inner landscape, even when it's rough, even when it's uncertain. You stop needing others to validate you because you've learned to witness your own truth, and witnessing becomes enough. The beauty of this practice is that it doesn't depend on mood or setting or words. You can practice it anywhere, in the middle of an argument, in the silence after a hard day, in the stillness of your breath. The mirror is always available, not to judge you, but to meet you. So when you feel yourself avoiding, pausing is the practice. When you feel the urge to distract, turning inward is the invitation, not to analyze, not to explain, just to see, and to stay long enough that what once scared you begins to soften, that what once felt unbearable begins to shift. That's how the mirror works. It doesn't change you. It helps you return to who you already were beneath the armor. The peace doesn't come from being someone else. It comes from finally letting go of who you're not. Now that the mirror has revealed truth without distortion, now that the soul has looked at itself without turning away, the need to control every step begins to loosen. A deeper breath begins to rise, because once the armor is dropped, another pressure often surfaces, the pressure to figure out what comes next, to solve the future before it arrives. But that tension doesn't bring peace. It only distracts from what's already here. The next teaching is not about strategy, it's about freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when direction is no longer a demand. In Buddhist thought, this is known as apranihita, aimlessness, not in the sense of being lost, but in the sense of no longer needing to arrive. When the obsession with destination fades, presence becomes possible. The bird that flies without direction isn't confused. It's free. It's not searching for something better. It's not escaping something worse. It's simply flying. And that, in itself, is peace. Most people are taught to fear aimlessness, to view it as laziness, as a failure of planning, as something dangerous or unproductive. But the kind of aimlessness spoken of here is not disconnection, it's deep presence. It's letting go of the mind's constant urge to predict, to measure, to secure. It's resting in the moment as it is, with no need to bend it into a plan. Future-based anxiety often shows up quietly. It hides in thoughts like, what if this doesn't work? Or, what should I do next? Or, am I falling behind? These thoughts aren't facts, they're habits, and they pull awareness out of the now into a version of tomorrow that doesn't even exist yet. Apranihita interrupts that habit. It invites you to stop answering questions that haven't been asked by life. The peace of aimlessness doesn't come from giving up on life. It comes from giving up the idea that life must constantly move forward in measurable ways. Growth still happens. Decisions are still made. But they arise from presence, not from panic. They rise like a wave, not forced, not predicted, but natural. Letting go of the need to know what's next means learning how to live without holding your breath. It means trusting that the next step will reveal itself when the moment is ready. Not when you've figured everything out, not when you've mapped every possibility, but when the soul is quiet enough to hear what the moment is whispering. This way of living requires courage, not the loud kind, but the kind that allows you to rest without constant justification, to pause without proving, to be here fully, even when here is uncertain. Aimlessness is not the absence of care. It's the refusal to let worry be your compass. When presence replaces planning, something shifts. The body relaxes, the mind unclenches, the emotions stop spinning stories. You begin to notice what you were missing when the future held all your attention, the texture of breath, the sound of silence, the softness in your own chest when you're not pushing yourself to arrive somewhere new. Most people live in what-ifs. What if I fail? What if I waste time? What if I regret this? These questions don't bring clarity, they bring exhaustion. The soul is not meant to live in imagined futures. It's meant to bloom in real moments. Moments that don't need to be perfect to be sacred. Living without a fixed direction doesn't mean you never move. It means your movement is no longer fear-driven. You act when the time is right. You wait when it's not. You stop chasing guarantees, because you've learned that peace can't be postponed until everything is certain. Peace either happens now or it doesn't happen at all. Aimlessness also softens identity. The moment you stop needing to be someone specific in the future, you begin to be more fully yourself in the present. The pressure to build a reputation, to fit a role, to prove your worth, all of it fades. You stop being a project and start being a presence. This is not passivity, it's precision, because when the noise of projection dies down, you begin to feel the gentle pull of real intention. Not forced intention, not the kind that says, I must achieve this or I'm nothing, but the kind that says, this feels right in this moment. That kind of direction is light, flexible, alive. Living this way teaches you that rest is not a delay. It's a doorway. That waiting is not weakness, it's wisdom. That you don't need to chase answers when the question hasn't fully formed. When you release your grip on the future, you find that life doesn't stop. It starts moving more clearly. Aimlessness invites you to meet each moment as it is, not as a step toward a goal, but as something complete in itself. Even your pain, even your confusion, they don't need to be solved to be honored. They just need space. And space only exists when you stop trying to race ahead of yourself. The ego often resists this. It wants certainty. It wants progress it can display. But the soul is slower. It doesn't perform. It dwells. It unfolds. And when the ego quiets, the soul begins to lead. Not with plans, but with presence. The bird that flies without direction still moves, but not out of fear, not out of force. It follows wind, instinct, rhythm. And that's how life can begin to feel, when you stop forcing it to go somewhere and start letting it reveal itself moment by moment. The practice here is subtle. When the urge to plan arises, pause. When the need to control shows up, breathe. When the anxiety of what's next begins to build, return to what's now. This moment, right now, is the only one you can live. The only one that's real. The only one that asks for your presence. You don't need to know how it all ends to live well today. You don't need to see the whole path to take one honest step. You don't need a detailed answer to feel whole. You are already whole, and the more you relax into that wholeness, the less direction becomes a burden. Aimlessness doesn't mean you'll never find purpose. It means you stop pretending you have to invent it. Purpose often reveals itself not through searching, but through stillness, through living, through being awake to your own breath, your own intuition, your own quiet wisdom. The next step always comes. The path always unfolds, but forcing it shuts the door. Apranihita keeps that door open, not by waiting passively, but by staying fully present with what is. And in that presence, life whispers what you need, not what your fear wants, but what your soul needs. You begin to feel a deep trust. Not a trust that everything will go the way you imagined, but a trust that whatever comes, you'll meet it with presence. That's the real freedom. Not certainty, but capacity. The more you live this way, the lighter you become. The less your joy is tied to outcomes. The less your peace is tied to control. The less your love is tied to conditions. Because everything begins to flow from now, not from what if or what then, but from what's right here, alive under your fingertips. This isn't a concept to memorize, it's a rhythm to return to. When life feels heavy, come back to the breath. When your thoughts spin, come back to your senses. When your future starts screaming, come back to your presence. And let that be enough, because it is. And now that the soul has loosened its grip on what's next, now that the weight of the future no longer dictates the rhythm of the present, something quieter rises to the surface. It's not about what hasn't happened yet, but what hasn't been released. Beneath all the forward motion, there are moments, words, memories left behind but not let go. Emotional debts, old guilt, quiet shame, bitterness that never got a chance to soften. If aimlessness is freedom from the future, then forgiveness is freedom from the past. And this freedom begins with compassion. There is a pain that doesn't scream. It settles deep in the body, in the thoughts that repeat without resolution, in the small inner voice that says, "You should have known better," or "You should have done more." Forgiveness doesn't start with an apology from someone else. It begins when the soul finally stops carrying what was never meant to be permanent. In Buddhist practice, compassion is not just kindness, it's clarity. It's the decision to stop punishing yourself for what's already over. To forgive is not to excuse. It is not to erase. It is to stop reliving. It is to stop dressing the same wounds every morning out of habit. And most of all, it is to make space. Space for healing, for rest, for gentleness. Because the truth is, no amount of guilt will change the past. No amount of self-judgment will turn pain into peace. But the moment compassion enters, the cycle breaks. Self-forgiveness is often the most difficult. Not because the harm was greater, but because the standards we hold ourselves to are often crueler than what we expect from others. The inner critic doesn't forget easily, but the heart, when softened with compassion, remembers something deeper, that being human means being imperfect, and that imperfection is not a failure, it's a path. In Buddhist tradition, forgiveness is not a one-time act. It's a practice. Like breath, like mindfulness, it must be returned to again and again. Because old pain resurfaces. Old shame hides in different forms, and every time it returns, compassion must return with it. Not to push the pain away, but to hold it differently. To say, yes, this happened. Yes, I was unkind. Yes, I was afraid. But I see it now, and I will no longer carry the whip. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without poison. It is being able to revisit a memory and feel the sadness without letting it tighten the chest. It is being able to see a former version of yourself and say, "You were trying. You didn't know yet, and it's okay." Many carry bitterness not toward others, but toward the self for being too trusting, too open, too slow to respond. But those qualities are not sins. They were attempts at love, attempts at safety, attempts at understanding in a moment of confusion. Compassion sees that. Compassion doesn't minimize what happened, but it stops confusing mistakes with identity. In metta meditation, the practice of loving kindness, one repeats gentle wishes. May I be safe. May I be well. May I be at peace. These are not affirmations, they are invitations. They open a door inside where the harsh voice softens and a gentler presence can begin to speak. That voice says, "You are not your worst moment. You are not the version of you that hurt someone out of fear. You are not the thoughts that scream at you in the middle of the night. You are a being learning how to be free." The cloak of forgiveness is woven from this kind of seeing. It wraps around the body not to hide the pain, but to hold it with warmth. It doesn't erase what happened. It changes the way it's carried. Bitterness is heavy, regret is sharp, but compassion dulls the edges. It says, "You can rest now. You've punished yourself enough." This applies to others too. Holding on to old grievances doesn't hurt them. It wears down your nervous system. The grudge is not stored in their body. It's stored in yours. Every time the story is repeated, the energy tightens. But when you begin to say, "I release this," not because they were right, but because I want to be free, something changes. Forgiveness is a boundary. It says, "I will no longer live inside this old loop." It doesn't mean opening the door again to someone who harmed you. It means closing the door to reliving the harm. Forgiveness can exist without reconciliation, because sometimes the person you're freeing yourself from never understood the weight they gave you, and that's okay. Sometimes the one who needs forgiving most is the version of you that did what you now regret. Buddhist compassion practice invites you to sit with that version of yourself, not to fix, not to correct, but to understand. Ask, what were you afraid of? What did you need that you didn't know how to ask for? What pain were you reacting to? The answers don't justify the actions, but they open space for kindness. The mind wants logic. The heart wants closure. But sometimes healing doesn't give either. Sometimes it gives only this: a quiet moment where you realize that carrying the pain longer won't protect you, that wearing the guilt like armor hasn't made you safer, that replaying the story hasn't brought clarity, only exhaustion. Compassion turns toward pain, not away from it. It says, "This is here, and I choose to be gentle." That gentleness doesn't come naturally for everyone, especially those who were raised in harshness, but it can be practiced. It begins with noticing when the inner critic speaks and choosing not to agree. Forgiveness is a form of mindfulness. You notice the tightness when shame rises. You name it gently. You breathe into it. You stop feeding it more stories. Over time, the charge lessens, the grip loosens, the cloak becomes lighter. In Buddhist psychology, the past is not something to fix, it's something to witness and release. That release isn't always sudden. It often comes in waves, but each wave softens the ground. Each return to compassion deepens the healing. There may still be grief, there may still be tears, but the tears no longer drown. They cleanse. That's the difference. Unforgiveness clogs the body. Compassion lets it flow. The soul doesn't want perfection. It wants peace. And peace comes when you stop arguing with your own history, when you stop needing it to be different in order to rest, when you stop saying, "if only," and start saying, "even so, I offer love." This kind of forgiveness becomes a way of life. You stop reacting with sharpness when someone makes a mistake. You pause. You remember how long it took you to grow, how often you failed and still kept going. That memory softens your voice, and that softness becomes medicine. Forgiveness doesn't need a ceremony. It happens quietly, in small moments of choice, choosing to stop bringing it up in your head, choosing to stop feeding the blame, choosing to breathe instead of criticize, choosing to see yourself as a student, not a villain. This cloak, once worn, becomes a refuge. When the world gets loud, you wrap it around you. When regret whispers, you pull it closer. When you feel the pull to punish, you sit inside it and remember that peace doesn't come from pushing. It comes from allowing. The emotional debts you carry are not yours to repay forever. They are invitations to return to love, not always to the other person, but to yourself. The love that says, "I see your past and I still choose peace." And now that the cloak of forgiveness has softened the weight of what came before, now that the mind no longer rewinds the past and the heart no longer begs for permission to rest, something steady begins to reveal itself underneath it all. Something simple, something ancient, something that never needed to be learned, only remembered. Beneath the stories, beneath the identities, beneath the storms, there is breath. And that breath has always been waiting, not as a task, not as a fix, but as a quiet rhythm, steady and true. This is the drumbeat beneath the storm. In Buddhist practice, this return to the breath is known as anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. It is not just a technique. It is a way of coming home. It is where presence lives when all the thoughts have passed. It is where safety begins when the body feels overwhelmed. It is where clarity appears when the emotions are too loud to sort. Breath is not just air. It is a thread connecting body and mind, moment and awareness, storm and stillness. Most people breathe without noticing. It happens in the background, automatically, mechanically. But the moment attention returns to the breath, something deeper opens. It's not just calming, it's grounding, because the breath is always now. It cannot happen in the past. It cannot happen in the future. It is only ever here. That's why the breath becomes an anchor. Not an anchor that traps you, but one that steadies you. In the middle of anxiety, it's the breath that says, "Stay." In the heat of anger, it's the breath that whispers, "Wait." In the numbness of sadness, it's the breath that quietly reminds, "You are still alive. You are still here." The practice of anapanasati begins with observation. No control, no manipulation, just watching. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Feel the coolness at the tip of the nose. Feel the chest rise. Feel the belly expand. Feel the breath leave again. That's all. But in that simple noticing, the entire nervous system begins to shift. Breath regulates the body. It communicates directly with the parasympathetic nervous system, the part that tells the body it's safe. When you slow the breath, the heart slows, the muscles release, the thoughts soften. This is not a mental trick. It is biological truth. And it becomes spiritual when met with full attention, because the breath doesn't judge. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't need you to fix anything. It just continues, moment after moment, whether you feel ready or not, whether you feel whole or broken. It holds you without condition. It invites you to return, not as someone better, but simply as someone here. In Buddhist monasteries, the first thing often taught is not philosophy. It's breath. Because before the mind can quiet, the body must be anchored, and the breath is the bridge. It doesn't require belief. It only requires presence, and presence is available in every inhale. You can use breath to soothe panic, to interrupt spiraling thought, to ground the body in moments of tension. But more than that, breath teaches you something the mind forgets, that peace is not an idea. It is a felt experience. It is the spaciousness that returns when breath is noticed deeply enough. The storm of the mind is loud. It brings worry, memory, regret, urgency. But beneath all that movement, the breath continues, like a drumbeat that never stops. When you sit and listen to it, truly listen, it starts to become louder than the chaos, not louder in sound, but louder in steadiness, in truth. This is why breath practice becomes more than a relaxation tool. It becomes a soul ritual, a moment of connection, a private, wordless conversation with the present moment. Every breath becomes a reminder. You do not need to fix everything right now. You only need to breathe. You can meet any emotion with breath. Anger, by meeting the breath, begins to cool. Fear, when held in breath, begins to feel held. Even grief, which feels endless, becomes more bearable when each wave is paired with a deep exhale. Not because it removes the pain, but because it offers a way to stay with it without drowning. Breath becomes a companion, not something you use, but something you return to. It waits for you when you're disconnected. It welcomes you without effort. It doesn't care how long you've been gone. It just continues, like a friend that never left, even when you forgot they were there. Practicing anapanasati does not require silence or seclusion. It can be done anywhere. In a crowded room, on a walk, during a conversation. It only asks one thing: attention. That attention transforms the breath from unconscious process to sacred presence. And over time, this attention creates spaciousness. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to pause instead of panic. You begin to feel your life from the inside out, not just the outside in. This changes everything, not by doing more, but by doing less, more fully. The breath teaches you how to stay, not in a place, but in yourself. When distraction pulls you away, breath brings you back. When emotion pulls you under, breath lifts you to the surface. When thought loops spin endlessly, breath breaks the rhythm. And in that break, awareness returns. Even a few minutes of breath awareness can begin to undo hours of stress. It is not a shortcut. It is a return. and each return deepens the trust between you and your own body. You stop treating it as something to control. You begin to experience it as an ally. The breath becomes a doorway. Sometimes what you find on the other side is calm, sometimes discomfort, sometimes deep silence. But no matter what appears, the breath holds it. It allows you to be present without being overwhelmed. And that presence becomes your sanctuary. You begin to notice how the breath changes with your state. Shallow when anxious, tight when angry, frozen when afraid. But in that noticing, something opens, the power to shift, not forcefully, but gently. You deepen the inhale, you slow the exhale, and with it, you shift the entire system. Over time, you stop waiting for peace to arrive from outside. You stop needing circumstances to be perfect, because you found a place inside that is always accessible, always calm, always returning. That place is not a fantasy, it is your own breath. Breathing this way does more than soothe. It connects. It reminds you that you are alive, that life is happening right now, that no matter what your mind says, the body is here, and that here-ness is sacred. It's the foundation of every meaningful experience. Anapanasati also teaches patience. You cannot rush the breath. You cannot demand it to change your state instantly. You must sit with it, trust it, let it work on you slowly, and that slowness becomes its own teaching. That not everything has to be quick to be powerful. Some days the breath feels easy, some days it feels blocked. But both are part of the practice. You don't need to control your experience, you just need to stay with it. Over time, that staying builds resilience. You begin to trust that you can stay with anything. This is not just a skill, it is a refuge. When life becomes unrecognizable, when plans collapse, when emotions flare, you return to the breath, not to escape, but to remember. You are not the storm, you are the one who breathes through it. The breath becomes the sound of peace, not silence, but rhythm, not absence, but presence. And the more you listen, the more you realize you are never truly lost, because your breath is always a way back. And now that the breath has settled the storm, now that the nervous system has remembered how to soften, there is space again, space not only to feel calm, but to radiate it. The breath made the body safe, the stillness made the mind quiet. Now comes the warmth, a gentle presence that starts within but doesn't stay there. Something that doesn't need permission to be shared. This is the flame of loving kindness, the candle that does not lose its fire by lighting another. This is metta. Metta bhavana is not a thought. It's not a wishful feeling. It's an energetic training. It's the deliberate cultivation of emotional balance through focused, sincere goodwill. In Buddhist practice, metta is the intentional development of unconditional kindness, not because others have earned it, not because the world is easy, but because inner peace requires it. When anger rises, when irritation sneaks in, when jealousy sparks, the body contracts, the breath shortens, the thoughts speed up. But metta does the opposite. It stretches space where tightness lives. It slows down the heat. It makes the heart feel safe enough to open again, not because the situation has changed, but because the energy inside it has. Loving kindness meditation starts simple. You repeat phrases quietly internally, directed toward yourself and others. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. These are not affirmations. They are not fantasies. They are energetic intentions. And when practiced with presence, they begin to change the emotional structure from the inside. Neuroscience now supports what ancient teachers knew. Intentional compassion reshapes the brain. It rewires emotional patterns. When metta is practiced regularly, the amygdala, the brain's threat center, becomes less reactive. Emotional outbursts soften. Defensive reactions slow. That's not theory, that's change. Real, biological, felt change. But metta is not just for good moods. Its real power shows up when kindness is the last thing you want to offer. When resentment is louder than breath. When judgment fills the mind like static. That's when metta begins its true work. Not by pretending everything's fine, but by saying, even here, there can be kindness. This practice doesn't bypass pain, it includes it. You start with yourself. Even if self-love feels impossible, even if the voice inside says you don't deserve it, you say it anyway, you repeat it anyway. Not because it feels true yet, but because truth needs space to grow. May I be kind to myself. May I let go of self-hatred. May I rest in my own presence. You say these things not to fix yourself, but to meet yourself. Metta is not perfection. It's permission. Permission to be human and still worthy of care. Then you move outward. First to someone you love, then someone neutral, then someone difficult, maybe even someone who's caused pain. This is where metta sharpens, not into a weapon, but into a healing edge. You say, may they be free from suffering, may they feel peace, not because they were right, but because bitterness doesn't bring balance. And the heart wants balance more than it wants revenge. Loving kindness is not passive, it's fierce. It says, I will not let this world harden me. I will feel pain and still choose warmth. I will acknowledge harm and still choose peace. This is not weakness, it's mastery. When metta becomes a habit, it starts to show up in unexpected moments. A soft tone when you would have snapped, a pause before a judgment, a gentle thought about someone you normally avoid. These shifts may seem small, but each one rebalances your emotional system. Each one interrupts a pattern of pain. This is what makes metta different from feel-good thinking. It's not layered over discomfort, it goes underneath it, into the roots, where fear lives, where anger hides, and it breathes kindness into those roots, slowly, patiently, until the ground itself becomes more stable. You may notice resistance, that's part of the process. Some days, metta feels mechanical. Other days, it breaks something open. Both are valid. The practice works, even when it feels dull. Because energy shifts don't always happen like lightning. Sometimes they move like soil, quietly, steadily, deeply. There is nothing fluffy about loving kindness. It is emotional strength. It is emotional maturity. The ability to care even when the world is sharp. The ability to soften even when your defenses are loud. The ability to return to warmth even when the mind is cold. Metta also supports boundaries. It's not about tolerating abuse. It's not about erasing differences. It's about relating to others without letting them dictate your emotional climate. It's about saying, I see your pain and I won't carry it. I feel your sharpness and I won't absorb it. I wish you well and I walk away in peace. When metta is directed inward, it calms the inner critic. The voice that says, you're failing. The voice that replays your worst moments. Loving kindness tells that voice, you've said enough. Now let me breathe. Let me rest. Let me speak to myself like I would a child I care about. This softens identity. You stop being the person who's always angry, always anxious, always proving. You become someone who can hold those experiences without becoming them. That's the rewiring, not erasing emotion, but shifting how it's met, not with fear, but with friendship. Practicing metta also trains patience. You don't rush into forgiveness. You don't force gratitude. You just sit. You repeat. You open. And over time, the heart begins to trust itself again. That trust becomes a foundation, steady, grounded, unshaken by small storms. There is a kind of joy in loving kindness that doesn't depend on anyone else's response. No one needs to change. Nothing needs to happen. The joy rises simply from the act of extending care, of remembering that, despite everything, warmth is still possible. This joy is subtle. It's not loud. It's not about happiness. It's about spaciousness. It's the kind of feeling that says, there is room here. Room for my sadness. Room for your anger. Room for the whole of it. And in that room, something rests. Metta makes it easier to let go, not by forgetting, but by shifting allegiance. You stop giving energy to the pain. You start giving energy to the healing. This doesn't make you naive, it makes you resilient. Because emotional balance isn't a fragile calm, it's a rooted calm, one that remains steady even when waves crash. Loving kindness is a form of activism. It changes the inner world, and that changes the outer one. When your presence becomes warm, others feel it, even if they don't know why. They soften too, and the ripple continues. You are not lighting your candle to be praised. You are lighting it because the world needs warmth, and so do you. Every act of kindness, even silent, becomes a signal. Peace is still possible. Humanity is still here. Compassion still matters. And when your own flame feels dim, you return to the breath. You let the breath steady you. You let metta relight the flame. You say, may I find light again. May I be gentle with this exhaustion. May I remember that I am still worthy of care. And from there, you light another. You walk with warmth. You speak with clarity. You listen with presence, not perfectly, but intentionally. And that intention, held consistently, practiced daily, changes everything. And now that the flame of loving kindness has been shared, now that warmth has replaced the cold spaces where judgment once lived, a different kind of knot rises to the surface, not made of anger, not made of bitterness, but of contradiction. The heart that wants peace, but still clings to pain. The mind that seeks clarity, but still circles confusion. The soul that longs for release, but still resists letting go. This knot isn't solved with effort. It doesn't respond to force. It unravels slowly by presence. like a rope that unties itself once pressure is removed. In Buddhist insight practice, inner conflict isn't seen as something to eliminate immediately. It's not treated as a flaw or failure. It's recognized as part of the human condition. Thoughts, emotions, beliefs, they pull in different directions. One part wants to move forward, another holds back. One part trusts, another doubts. This internal tug-of-war is not something to fight. It's something to understand, gently. When contradictions arise inside, the first impulse is often to fix them, to pick a side, to silence one voice and amplify another. But that tension only deepens the knot. It makes the internal world feel like a battlefield. Real peace doesn't come from silencing a part of yourself. It comes from creating enough space that every part can breathe. Living with internal conflict doesn't mean giving up on resolution. It means allowing the tension to be present without needing to control its timing. The rope unravels when it's not being pulled in panic, when each side is heard, not judged, when emotion is witnessed, not labeled as wrong. That's where reconciliation begins. Emotional contradictions often live under the surface. You may want to forgive someone and still feel rage. You may want to move on, but still feel stuck. You may feel grateful and sad at the same time. These don't cancel each other out. They coexist. And in Buddhism, this coexistence is not a problem. It's a sign that the inner world is being fully met. Trying to rush these contradictions into resolution only leads to suppression. You can't silence grief with positivity. You can't erase anger with forgiveness. Both need room. Both need presence. Letting the rope untie itself means recognizing that you are allowed to carry mixed emotions. You don't need to feel one thing at a time. You don't need to simplify what is complex just to feel in control. Often, internal conflict shows up as two opposing voices. One voice wants rest. The other demands productivity. One voice says it's time to heal. The other insists you're not trying hard enough. Instead of choosing which voice to obey, start by acknowledging both. Let them speak. Let them be heard. Awareness itself begins to soften the tension, because what these voices usually want is not victory. They want to be acknowledged. When you stop rushing to fix the contradiction, you begin to hear the wisdom underneath it, the fear beneath the anger, the longing beneath the resistance, the love beneath the sadness. Inner reconciliation is not about solving the parts, it's about seeing their roots. Some parts of you are still shaped by the past, some by hopes for the future. They don't always agree, but they don't have to. Your job isn't to make them all sound the same. Your job is to hold the space where they can exist without being at war. This is what Buddhist practice means when it speaks of equanimity, not indifference, but balance. The ability to let thoughts come and go without grabbing them. The ability to let emotion arise and pass without becoming it. That balance doesn't erase conflict. It makes room for it. And room is what leads to integration. Trying to solve everything right away creates more pressure, and pressure tightens the rope. But when you release the need to solve, the tension loosens. Insights arise on their own. Healing emerges naturally, not because you forced it, but because you stopped fighting yourself. One of the most powerful shifts comes when you realize that not every internal contradiction is a problem to fix. Some are invitations to expand your compassion, to become big enough to hold more than one truth, to realize that you are not one thing, you are a mosaic, and every part of you, even the ones that seem to disagree, belong. This doesn't mean passivity, it means maturity. The emotional maturity to say, I can carry sadness and love at once. I can feel doubt and still show up. I can be uncertain and still move forward. Life doesn't wait for your feelings to agree. Peace comes from moving with them, not waiting for them to align. Self-reconciliation means bringing kindness to the parts of you that feel broken, to the fear that tries to protect you by overthinking, to the guilt that masks a need for safety, to the resistance that's just an old form of care. None of these parts need punishment. They need welcome. Sometimes it helps to visualize each part of yourself sitting in a circle, not arguing, not competing, just being. What does each one need? What is each one afraid of? The rope unties when the entire circle is invited to stay without pressure to agree. This practice also changes how you relate to others, because the more you accept contradiction within yourself, the more tolerant you become of contradiction in those around you. You stop needing everyone to be consistent. You stop demanding perfect harmony. And that softens relationships in ways words never could. Living without the pressure to resolve everything is not resignation, it's wisdom. The kind that understands that peace is not a solved equation. It's a steady presence that holds even what doesn't make sense. The kind of presence that can sit with an untied rope and know this too is healing. There's a gentleness in this kind of practice, a patience that grows not from perfection, but from humility. A humility that says, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to stay. I'm willing to breathe. I'm willing to keep showing up with my whole self, even the parts that haven't figured it out yet. And from this kind of willingness, something else begins to unfold. A sense of safety, a sense that even when nothing is fixed, you are not broken. That even when nothing is resolved, you are still whole. This is not a place the mind understands. It's a truth the heart remembers, once it's quiet enough to feel it. Letting the rope untie itself means letting the process take its own time. Letting understanding come in its own shape. Letting yourself feel without needing to organize those feelings into a neat structure. Because real peace isn't tidy, it's honest. And honesty allows you to live fully now, not after everything is sorted out. And now that the rope has begun to untie itself, now that internal contradiction is no longer a war zone, but a quiet room where everything has a place, a different kind of energy begins to emerge. Not movement, not emotion, but a kind of stillness that doesn't need answers. It doesn't seek closure. It holds everything without getting pulled in. This stillness doesn't numb. It sees. It remains clear even as the world shakes. This is not withdrawal, it is wisdom, and in Buddhism, this is known as upekkha, equanimity, the still lake beneath the mind. Equanimity is not coldness, it's not the refusal to feel, it's not the denial of pain, it is the deep ability to feel everything without drowning in any of it. the steady capacity to remain rooted when the waters above are stormy, to sense the disturbance but not become disturbed. This state doesn't come from indifference, it grows from maturity, the understanding that not everything requires a reaction, not everything deserves your energy, and not everything will go your way. Upekkha begins with observation. It's built slowly by watching life with open eyes and an ungripping heart. You watch emotions rise and fall. You see joy come and go. You notice disappointment, then see it pass. You witness praise, then see it fade. In all these waves, you begin to realize a deeper truth. Peace is not what you feel. It's what remains when you don't cling to what you feel. The reason most people lose their balance is not because emotions are strong, but because they hold on to them. They attach their identity to happiness and panic when it leaves. They feel pain and start believing it will never pass. But emotions are weather. The mind is the sky. Upekkha is learning to rest in the sky, not in the clouds. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care wisely. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding with clarity. You learn the difference between being compassionate and being consumed. You realize that you can love someone deeply and still let them go, that you can grieve without collapsing, that you can feel joy without fearing its loss. Equanimity allows for emotional openness without emotional chaos. It's a way of staying in relationship with the moment while keeping your center intact. This balance doesn't make life dull. It makes it honest. You stop chasing highs. You stop fearing lows. You start meeting each experience with calm respect. To develop this state, you must first understand impermanence. Everything shifts. Pleasure, pain, success, failure, they all move. Upekkha grows when you stop expecting things to stay, when you no longer hinge your peace on outcomes, when you stop trying to freeze the parts of life that feel good and instead let them come and go like breath. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you powerful, because you no longer act out of desperation. You act from clarity, from stillness, from knowing that you don't need to control every detail to feel safe. That freedom gives you presence. That presence gives you peace. Equanimity also comes from reducing attachment to roles, identities, and labels. The more tightly you hold on to who you think you are, the more shaken you become when life contradicts it. But when you see your identity as fluid, as changing, you remain grounded even when life redefines you. The practice of Upekkha invites you to sit quietly with whatever arises, to not chase it, to not escape it, just to sit. When something difficult shows up, fear, anger, craving, you don't shove it away. You don't dramatize it either. You just acknowledge, this too is here. That acknowledgement breaks the chain of reactivity. It turns the storm into rain. Equanimity grows through repetition, through gentle practice, not by demanding yourself to be calm, but by returning to calm every time you drift. When life shakes you, you breathe. When someone lashes out, you ground yourself before you respond. When a feeling flares up, you feel it, but you don't fuel it. This becomes a way of protecting your inner life. Not with walls, but with clarity. You know your values, you know your limits, you know what energy is worth absorbing and what's not. Upekkha gives you emotional sovereignty. the ability to feel deeply without losing yourself. You begin to let people be as they are. You stop trying to control them. You release the need to fix every situation. This creates emotional spaciousness, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. People feel safer in your presence because they know they are not being managed. They are being witnessed. This stillness also helps in times of success. You don't get swept away by praise. You don't confuse validation with value. You enjoy the moment, but you don't attach to it. And when the applause fades, you don't panic. Because your peace wasn't built on being seen, it was built on being centered. Upekkha gives you strength in loss too. It holds you steady when life removes what you thought you couldn't live without. It whispers, you can grieve without despair. You can remember without regret. You can feel this fully and still remain whole. This form of calm is not practiced only on cushions. It is practiced in traffic, in difficult conversations, in unexpected disappointments. Every moment of friction becomes a chance to return, not to control, but to clarity, to the still lake that watches it all. You also start to notice when others are trapped in reactivity, and instead of getting pulled in, you stay present. You become the one who listens without escalating, who observes without absorbing. That presence becomes healing. It ripples outward, even in silence. This doesn't mean you become emotionless. It means your emotions stop steering the ship. You honor them, you feel them, but you also hold them. Like waves on the surface of a vast body of water, movement above, steadiness below. Developing this requires patience. You won't feel balanced every day. Some days will bring emotional weight that pulls you under. But even on those days, Upekkha reminds you, the stillness is not gone. It's just buried, and breath will return you to it. Meditation helps. Sitting quietly and watching the breath. Watching thoughts, watching sensations. Not fixing, not interfering, just observing. This trains the mind to recognize that it can hold experience without being ruled by it. And slowly, this practice expands into life, into parenting, where you no longer overreact to your child's emotions, into relationships, where you stop expecting someone else to complete you, into work, where setbacks no longer define your self-worth. You stop measuring your life by emotional highs and lows. You start measuring it by presence, by how well you respond, by how deeply you listen, by how rarely you abandon yourself. This is the true calm, not a fragile peace that exists only when everything is perfect, but a strong, steady stillness that exists even when nothing is. A kind of calm that doesn't resist life, but holds it with grace. And now that the still lake beneath the mind has taught you how to remain calm while everything moves, now that equanimity has become more than a concept, something lived, something breathed, another invitation begins to surface. Not to go further, not to go deeper, but to stop going, to release the pressure to improve, the pressure to fix, the pressure to become anything other than already whole. This is not a resignation. It is a relief. This is the bridge that leads nowhere. And in that directionless path, peace finally appears. In the Dhamma, this release is called viraga, not indifference, but dispassion, a quiet letting go of the constant craving to make the moment more than it is. Viraga is not cold. It is clear. It doesn't kill desire. It dissolves the clinging that turns desire into suffering. The exhaustion of needing life to match your plan. The strain of needing every moment to deliver something better than the last. The ache of never being fully at rest because something is always missing. Striving is what makes peace feel far away. Not because peace isn't here, but because striving tells you that it's elsewhere. It says, do more, be more, fix more. It dangles future versions of happiness like carrots on sticks, and the moment you reach one, it moves the stick again. Viraga gently removes the stick. This doesn't mean you never act. It means your action isn't driven by lack. You still create, love, contribute. But you don't chase those things to escape yourself. You begin to move without needing the movement to complete you. You begin to rest without guilt. You begin to stop without feeling behind. Non-striving is not laziness. It's the absence of pressure. It's when effort comes from alignment, not desperation. From clarity, not fear. From joy, not hunger. When you walk the bridge that leads nowhere, it means you no longer measure progress by how far you've gone. You measure it by how deeply you've arrived. The teachings describe how craving creates cycles. Wanting leads to grasping. Grasping leads to clinging. Clinging leads to suffering. And that suffering leads to more craving. It never ends unless you step out. Viraga is the step out. Not by force, but by seeing clearly that chasing peace never brings it closer. You begin to notice how often your thoughts say, "It will be better when you get the answer, when you get the apology, when you become more confident, when the world changes." And then you pause and you ask, what if it never does? Can I still be here? Can I still breathe? And in that question, the nervous system relaxes, the craving loosens, the mind unknots. Because it's not what's missing that creates stress, it's the belief that something must always be added. But Viraga shows you, nothing needs to be added for this moment to be enough. This kind of dispassion doesn't numb feeling, it softens fixation. You still feel joy, but you don't chase it. You still feel sadness, but you don't identify with it. You still feel love, but it doesn't trap you in expectation. You begin to see that peace is not what you feel, it's how lightly you hold what you feel. And with this lightness, life becomes less sticky. Thoughts come and you watch them. Feelings rise and you allow them. Desires appear and you don't build your life around them. You begin to float, not in avoidance, but in freedom. You're no longer caught in the loop of more. The bridge that leads nowhere doesn't take you forward. It takes you out of the game. The game of comparison, the game of chasing validation, the game of endless productivity. You stop playing, and in that stopping, the soul breathes again. Even spiritual seeking can become striving. The hunger to awaken, to be healed, to feel light all the time. But Viraga shows you the paradox. The harder you chase awakening, the further it runs. But the moment you stop chasing, it often arrives, quietly, naturally, without fanfare. Letting go of striving doesn't mean letting go of care. You still tend to life. You still engage. but you no longer tie your well-being to the outcome. You stop demanding that every action be productive. You stop needing every day to bring improvement. You stop using the future as an escape from the present. You also begin to trust life more. Because control comes from fear, and striving is just control in disguise. But when you release the grip, you see that life still unfolds. The breath still comes. People still love. Healing still happens. Often more gently, more beautifully, without your effort getting in the way. This doesn't mean you never struggle again, but the struggle becomes simpler. You notice it without identifying with it. You let it pass without making it your personality, and slowly you discover the incredible power of doing less, of needing less, of simply being. Viraga also invites a different kind of love, one that doesn't hold or possess, one that doesn't demand to be returned, one that gives without expectation and lets go without punishment. Because dispassion doesn't remove love, it purifies it. It strips away the ego that says, "You must make me happy," and leaves only the open heart that says, "I love because it's my nature." This path removes the hooks. The mind is full of them, attachments that say, if this, then that. If they stay, I'm okay. If I win, I'm enough. If they see me, I belong. Viraga takes the hook out of each thought. It lets the thought pass like a bird across the sky. No cage, no net, just freedom. You begin to live in rhythm with life, not in resistance to it. When things rise, you meet them. When they fall, you let them. When you're needed, you show up. When you're alone, you rest. There is no push, only presence. This non-striving does not make you less ambitious. It makes your ambition cleaner. Less grasping, more service. Less ego, more clarity. You stop needing your dreams to save you, and that's what makes you powerful, because now your joy isn't on the other side of effort, it's within it. Dispassion also removes the craving for emotional perfection. You stop needing to feel good all the time. You stop measuring your progress by how often you're happy. Instead, you begin to value how peacefully you relate to your emotions, whether they're light or heavy. The practice becomes letting go again and again. Letting go of the demand for answers, letting go of the fantasy of completion, letting go of the illusion that peace lives in a future moment. You let go not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that clinging never brought peace anyway. And from this letting go, a new kind of energy rises, one that moves naturally, one that acts without strain, one that helps, speaks, creates, and rests, not for reward, not for applause, not for self-worth, but simply because that's what the moment asked for. This is the beauty of the bridge that leads nowhere. It takes you out of the loop, not out of life, but out of the tension that makes life feel like a race. And as you walk it, something amazing happens. You arrive, not at a goal, but in yourself, fully, quietly, already whole. And now that the soul has stepped off the path of striving, now that life no longer needs to be different for peace to exist, something more hidden begins to rise. Not a craving, not a distraction, but a quiet presence that's been waiting at the edge of awareness. It is not loud, but it is persistent. It does not ask for healing, it asks to be seen. It is the shadow, not the enemy of peace, but the part of you peace cannot exist without. the part that must return, not to take over, but to be held. This is the shadow that walks beside peace. In Buddhist understanding, shadow is not evil. It is unseen. It is whatever part of the self has been pushed away, denied, silenced, or shamed. It is sadness rebranded as weakness, anger disguised as wrongness, fear mistaken for failure. Every emotion, memory, or trait that did not feel safe enough to be acknowledged became a shadow. But shadows do not disappear. They wait, and in their waiting, they shape behavior. They turn reactivity into habit. They turn stories into armor. They make you perform instead of live. The truth is, every person carries a shadow, and suffering often comes not from the shadow itself, but from the refusal to recognize it. Denial takes energy. Hiding yourself is heavy. Pretending that everything within you is light and calm drains the nervous system. The more you fight what is dark inside you, the more you feed it with shame. But when you meet it with awareness, clear, still, compassionate awareness, it softens. Not because it's fixed, but because it's no longer exiled. Shadow integration in Buddhism begins with mindfulness, not analysis, not explanation, just presence. You begin to sit with your discomfort, not to judge it, not to dress it up, but to feel it fully. The anger that comes quickly, the jealousy that tightens the chest, the bitterness that simmers under your smile. You bring them into the light, not to punish them, but to understand what they protect. The shadow does not need to be defeated. It needs to be understood. Most reactive behavior is a shadow trying to be heard. The raised voice, the silent withdrawal, the overachievement. These are messengers, and they don't go away until you listen. Mindfulness allows that listening. You sit with the sensation. You name it gently. You do not tell it to leave. You let it speak. Compassion is the second piece. Because seeing the shadow without love becomes another form of rejection. The shame must be held, not just noticed. The anger must be met with kindness, not fear. The part of you that felt abandoned needs to know you won't abandon it again. That's where healing begins, not in change, but in acceptance. When these forgotten parts are finally included, they stop needing to shout. They stop hijacking emotions. They stop turning relationships into mirrors of pain. Because once you turn toward them, they don't need to be projected onto others. You stop blaming. You start owning. And ownership brings freedom. The shadow holds truth. The kind that's not comfortable, but honest. It tells you where you hurt, where you hide, where you perform instead of connect. It doesn't speak to hurt you, it speaks to bring you home, but you have to be willing to sit through the discomfort of hearing what you've long tried not to feel. Mindfulness creates a space where you can sit with that discomfort without reacting, without fixing, without pretending it isn't there. You learn to breathe into the tightness, to soften around the guilt, to name the fear without needing it to leave. This presence creates safety, and safety makes integration possible. You begin to see that your anger protected your boundaries, your sadness marked your depth, your fear was once trying to keep you safe. These are not enemies, they are old strategies. When you meet them with compassion, they don't disappear, they evolve, they stop sabotaging, they start informing. The goal is not to become someone without shadow. That's impossible. The goal is to become someone who is no longer controlled by the shadow's silence, someone who doesn't flinch when their darkness shows, someone who sees the full spectrum of their being and holds it with steady breath. Integration also means releasing the identity of the good one, the part of you that needed to be liked to survive, that shaped its words, its actions, its emotions to earn approval. That version of you served a purpose. But it's not the whole truth, and the truth is always messier and more beautiful. When you stop trying to be only light, you stop fearing your darkness. You stop pretending. You start connecting. Real connection comes from wholeness, not performance. And wholeness requires shadow, not as a flaw, as a feature. In meditation, you can invite these parts in. You don't have to search. Just sit. Breathe. Let what is unprocessed rise. The irritation, the shame, the memory. Don't analyze. Don't run. Watch. Offer a phrase. You are welcome. I see you. You belong here too. This inner welcoming changes your outer world, because when you no longer fear your own shadow, you stop fearing it in others. You become more tolerant, more curious, less reactive. You listen better, you judge less, and others feel that safety in your presence. Shadow work isn't a one-time healing, it's a lifelong relationship. New experiences surface new parts. New challenges awaken old wounds, but you no longer push them down. You meet them as they arise, not to conquer them, but to include them in the circle of self. You also stop needing others to carry your shadow for you. You don't blame them for the traits you've buried. You don't attack them for the feelings you haven't faced. You become responsible, not in a heavy way, but in a free way. You understand yourself, so you stop projecting. Peace becomes fuller, not because life becomes easier, but because you become more whole. The part of you that once said, "I'm not enough," softens. The part that said, "I'm too much," exhales. The part that said, "I can't be this way," starts to say, "Maybe I can." This is what it means to walk beside the shadow, not behind it, not running from it, beside it, in harmony, in awareness, in love. And from that relationship, you become more real. And realness is what peace has always waited for. And now that the shadow has been welcomed and its voice no longer silenced, now that the parts once hidden are gently included in the circle of wholeness, the space around you becomes quieter, not empty, but awake, not passive, but deeply alive. Something in the heart begins to listen, not for noise, but for meaning, not for instruction, but for presence. This is not a moment to act. It is a moment to hear what is already speaking. This is the bell that rings without striking. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness bells are used not just to signal time or action, but to call attention back to the present moment. They don't command, they invite. Their sound isn't just heard, it's felt. It enters the body and slows the breath. It wakes up a kind of stillness inside that was always there, waiting. But what happens when the bell is not outside of you? What happens when awareness itself becomes the bell? To be fully present without doing anything is a radical act in a world that demands reaction. The mind is trained to look for what's next, to plan, to fix, to optimize. But presence says, stop, not forever, just now. Be here without condition. Listen, not with ears, but with stillness. This is the bell that rings without striking. It doesn't sound like anything. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It is the moment when you feel everything fall quiet inside, not because the world changed, but because your awareness turned fully toward what is already here. In this space, insight arises, not through thinking, but through noticing. Wisdom doesn't yell, it waits. Beneath the layers of mental noise, emotional tension, and physical distraction, it's always been there. A deep, silent knowing that says, there is nothing missing. This state is not about zoning out. It's not about numbing. It's about tuning in so clearly that even the smallest sensations, your breath, your heartbeat, the feeling of air on skin, become enough. The present moment stops being a waiting room for something better. It becomes the destination. Many people hear, be present, and assume it means pause and look around. But true presence goes further. It means not trying to change what you're experiencing, not reshaping the moment to make it more comfortable. It means dropping into the now so completely that even discomfort becomes sacred. This doesn't happen through force. It happens through allowing. The bell cannot be struck. It rings on its own when you become still enough to hear it, when you stop chasing the next idea, when you stop layering stories over your experience, when you meet the moment like it is a teacher. This level of mindfulness brings the heart out of sleep. Not the emotional heart, the intuitive one. The part of you that knows when something is true before words arrive. That kind of knowing lives in presence. It can't be found in planning. It doesn't rise through worry. It opens through stillness. Sometimes it shows up in a breath that feels unusually deep. Sometimes in the realization that you've stopped clenching your jaw. Sometimes in a tear you didn't expect. Sometimes in a feeling of relief that has no clear source. These are the subtle sounds of the bell. The practice is not to make these moments happen, but to be quiet enough that you don't miss them. The mind says, more input, more information, more guidance. But often, the clarity you're looking for isn't outside. It's in the silence you've been avoiding. This is why stillness becomes sacred, not because it looks impressive, but because it reconnects you with your original wisdom, the part that was always calm, always steady, always aware. Mindfulness in this sense is not concentration. It is openness, a wide, relaxed attention that doesn't cling to what arises. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, the body shifts. But your awareness doesn't grip any of it. It watches like a mountain watches clouds. The bell within rings most clearly when you are not trying to hear anything, when there is no effort to meditate well, no pressure to feel a certain way, just breath, just body, just being. You begin to see how often you try to earn peace. Through performance, through understanding, through doing it right. But presence doesn't need you to earn it. It just asks you to notice. And that noticing becomes a return to something simple and profound. You are here. This is where emotional exhaustion begins to heal, not through solutions, but through silence, through letting the nervous system rest in a space where nothing needs to be figured out. where you're allowed to just be without improving anything. In monasteries, when the bell rings, everyone stops. No matter what they're doing, they place their hands together and take a breath. This pause is not about control, it's about reverence, the recognition that now is sacred, that now is enough, that now is the only place life actually happens. You don't need a monastery to feel this, you only need willingness. A pause before you react, a deep breath before you speak, a quiet moment before you reach for your phone. These are the modern bells, and they ring when your awareness returns. The mind may fight this at first. It wants movement, it wants distraction. But each time you return, each time you pause and feel the moment fully, you strengthen a different muscle. The one that knows you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness beneath them. This kind of presence begins to heal more than stress. It starts to heal the disconnection that's been normalized, the feeling of always being somewhere else, of never fully arriving, the sense that you're always missing something. But presence shows you. Nothing is missing when you're fully here. You begin to remember things you forgot. How to listen. How to breathe without urgency. How to look at the sky without needing to capture it. How to touch life directly without commentary. This remembrance is the bell, and the more you allow it, the more it shapes how you move through the world. You stop rushing, you speak slower, you eat with attention, you listen without waiting for your turn to talk. These aren't techniques, they are expressions of presence. The heart, once reactive, becomes receptive. It doesn't flare up at every trigger. It doesn't race ahead. It waits. It watches. It feels. And from this waiting comes wisdom, not learned, but remembered. Wisdom that says, peace is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of resistance to what is. You start to recognize sacredness not in rituals, but in breath, in pauses, in silence, in the way your feet feel on the floor, in the sensation of warmth on your skin. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because it changed, but because you finally arrived to see it. This presence is the foundation of all inner transformation. Without it, every practice becomes performance, but with it, every moment becomes practice. Not formal, not forced, just real, just now. And now that the bell has rung from within, without sound, without force, now that the present moment has been heard, not as a command, but as an invitation, what comes next is not motion. It is rest. But not the kind of rest most people chase, not sleep as escape, not pause as delay. This is the kind of rest that happens when the soul no longer wants to run, when the mind stops demanding something else, when the body doesn't need to collapse to be still. This is resting in what is. This is the pillow of the present moment. True rest isn't only physical, it is emotional and mental safety. It's the place where you no longer feel the need to be on guard. It's where you stop checking for what's wrong. It's where you are not waiting for the next thing to manage, the next decision to solve, the next thought to chase. Real rest comes not just from being tired, but from feeling safe enough to stop striving. And in Buddhist practice, that kind of rest starts with presence. Presence is not always exciting. It's not dramatic. It is simple. Breathing with awareness, feeling your own weight, letting the moment be just a moment. This kind of mindfulness is not a meditation technique. It's a kind of homecoming. You don't need to be alone or in silence to feel it. You need to allow yourself to stop looking for something else. The modern mind is not taught how to rest. It's taught how to pause only when collapsing. But mindfulness asks something different. It asks you to notice where you are without resistance. It asks you to see that the breath is already happening. The body is already here. You don't need to add anything. You need to stop fleeing what's already present. This kind of rest is emotional too. It is the rest that comes when you stop narrating your life every second. When you stop over-analyzing what went wrong. When you stop preparing for what could. The nervous system settles not because the external world is quiet, but because you've chosen not to fight the moment. The pillow of the present moment is soft, not because life has no pain, but because presence doesn't harden around it. You feel what's here, and you breathe. You don't flinch from it, you don't numb it, you include it. And in that inclusion, something deeper exhales. Mindfulness allows this rest because it interrupts the habit of rejecting now. Every time you wish the moment was different, the body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, the mind spins. But when you say yes to what's here, not because it's perfect, but because it's real, you return to ground. This ground isn't a place. It's a relationship with yourself. It's the moment you stop trying to earn stillness and begin to realize you've always had access to it. The soul doesn't want constant activity. It wants contact. Contact with now, with breath, with simplicity. In this way, presence becomes the pillow under the weight of your mind. The mind no longer needs to be managed. It's no longer a project. It just becomes another part of the moment. Thoughts may still come, but they float, not crash. They rise, but don't dominate. Because you are not trying to control them, you are letting them be what they are. The more you practice resting in what is, the more you find moments throughout the day where you can pause, not to achieve, but to return. When waiting in line, you feel your feet. When stuck in traffic, you return to your breath. When faced with uncertainty, you remember you don't have to figure it out right now. This becomes rest, even in motion. This kind of rest is radical, because it challenges the belief that peace must be earned through hard work. It challenges the belief that there is something more important than now. It reminds you that even when the world is moving fast, your awareness doesn't have to. Over time, resting in presence begins to rewire the body's stress response. You don't go into overdrive every time something unexpected happens. You don't collapse into guilt or shame every time something goes wrong. You begin to trust the moment, not because you've mastered it, but because you've stopped needing to escape it. This rest becomes a form of emotional safety. You are no longer caught in the storm of your emotions because you've learned how to sit beneath the clouds, not avoid them, not fight them, just sit. And that sitting becomes a sanctuary. The more often you rest in what is, the more your relationship to life changes. You stop needing every moment to inspire you. You stop needing every person to approve of you. You stop needing to fix your feelings before you can enjoy something simple. Resting in the present removes the extra weight from your shoulders. This is not a withdrawal from life. It's the beginning of real participation. Because only when you are here can you actually meet what's in front of you. Only when you stop projecting forward or backward can you respond with clarity. That's not detachment. it's connection. And connection is healing. Not because it solves everything, but because it reminds you that nothing has to be solved right now. The moment does not need your perfection, it only needs your presence. This also becomes a form of protection, not from others, but from your own habits. The habit of pushing, the habit of overthinking, the habit of ignoring your body. When you choose to rest in what is, you break the cycle. You teach your mind that it's okay to stop. You begin to see that nothing in this moment is attacking you, that even discomfort, when met fully, loses its sharpness, that even fear, when watched with breath, loses its grip, that even confusion, when not fed with thought, becomes quieter. This level of presence doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from allowing more, allowing yourself to feel what's here, allowing yourself to breathe into your belly, allowing yourself to put down the mental tools and simply sit with the softness of now. And when you rest like this, your soul remembers. It remembers what it's like to not be in conflict with life. It remembers that peace doesn't mean silence or stillness. It means no longer resisting what is. The pillow becomes not just a metaphor, but a way of being, a way of softening into yourself. You don't need to meditate for hours to feel this. You only need a moment of full presence, a moment where you say, I don't need to fix anything right now. I can be here, breathing, feeling, witnessing. That moment becomes the medicine. The deeper this practice goes, the more you find yourself craving simplicity. Not because life gets easier, but because your inner life gets quieter. And in that quiet, you begin to rest even during difficulty. You begin to soften even during change. You begin to breathe even when things don't go your way. And this, too, becomes strength. Not loud, not forceful, but real. Because the ability to rest in what is, to find safety in the now, is what gives you resilience, what helps you return again and again, no matter how many times you drift away. And now that the soul has remembered how to rest in the arms of presence, now that nothing needs to be fixed for peace to be possible, another truth quietly enters. Not a teaching to memorize, not a method to master, a truth too simple for the mind to chase. That the deepest peace doesn't come from winning battles within, it comes from dropping the sword. It comes from surrendering the voice that always wants to be right, to be seen, to be protected. This is not collapse. This is not weakness. This is the mountain that bows. In Buddhist understanding, humility is not humiliation. It is not the shrinking of self. It is the softening of false self. It is the quiet choice to no longer place I at the center of every story, every fear, every hurt. The ego, in its constant spinning, is what suffers most. It wants control. It wants identity. It wants everything that happens to mean something about itself. But the soul does not need identity to be whole. It only needs freedom. To bow like the mountain means to stay rooted and strong, but not rigid. It means to know your place in the vastness of life and still remain grounded. Ego wants to rise endlessly, but true peace comes not from rising, but from releasing. Not from building a bigger sense of self, but from seeing that the self was never solid to begin with. This is not philosophy. It's a felt shift, a loosening of inner tension, a dissolving of the need to be defended. You start to notice how many of your thoughts are built around protecting an image. What people think of you, whether you've done enough, whether you're being respected, and every one of those thoughts tightens the body, because identity is heavy. Humility, in its truest form, is light. It lets go of the need to prove. It lets go of the need to control perception. It allows life to happen without taking it personally, not because you're numb, but because you're free. Free from the story of me. This freedom does not make you invisible. It makes you real, without the mask, without the performance, without the exhausting need to be more. The mountain bows not because it's small, but because it knows it doesn't need to compete. It doesn't compare itself to the sky. It doesn't argue with the wind. It stands, and in standing, it bows. The ego says, I am the center. Everything that happens reflects me. But the humble mind says, life is vast. Not everything is about me. And from that humility comes peace. You stop over-interpreting every look, every word, every failure. You stop assigning meaning to events that were never personal, and in that space, the nervous system calms. Surrendering the ego doesn't mean surrendering care. You still show up, you still speak, you still live, but you stop clinging to every moment as a mirror of your worth. You are no longer defined by what goes right or wrong. That's how the inner war ends, not with conquest, but with clarity. This humility also transforms how you relate to others. You stop needing to be above them. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop seeking superiority. You see others not as competition, but as reflections of the same truth. Everyone is fighting a war within. And humility says, let me not add to it. The mountain that bows shows us this paradox. The stronger you become inside, the less you need to appear strong. The more you accept your impermanence, the more grounded you feel. You become soft without becoming weak, clear without becoming hard. You respond not from ego, but from essence. And essence doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't chase validation. It simply is. Humility is the doorway back to essence. It asks nothing. It gives everything. When the I drops, compassion rises. Understanding deepens. Silence begins to speak. Buddhist humility is not self-denial. It's self-understanding. It sees that what suffers most is not the heart, but the self-image wrapped around it. Every time you try to become someone, you tense. Every time you try to preserve an identity, you harden. But when you drop the narrative and meet the moment directly, the tension disappears. In that space, peace doesn't need to be created. It's already there, hidden under the noise of ego, waiting beneath the roles, sleeping inside the need to always be more. Humility wakes you up to the truth that you are already enough, not because you've achieved it, but because you've stopped chasing it. This dropping of ego doesn't remove responsibility, it deepens it, because now your choices are no longer about image, they're about truth. You don't act to be admired, you act because it's right. You don't speak to be clever, you speak to connect. You don't move to impress, you move from stillness. This also heals shame, because shame is ego turned inward. The belief that your mistakes define you, that your flaws are proof you are not enough. But humility sees flaws without judgment. It says, I am not perfect, and I don't need to be. I make errors, and I remain whole. I fall, and I do not lose worth. This unburdens the heart. You no longer have to curate every version of yourself. You no longer need to hide the messy parts. You begin to show up as you are, not out of rebellion, but out of relief. There is nothing left to defend. In this way, the mountain that bows becomes a symbol of wholeness, not flashy, not loud, but deeply peaceful. It carries weight, but not burden. It offers strength, but not control. It stands in its place without trying to rise above others. That is the kind of peace that lasts. And this humility doesn't only show in silence, it shows in how you listen, in how you accept feedback, in how you admit when you don't know, in how you let someone else be right. These moments are small but powerful. They break the cycle of defensiveness. They open the door to connection. The deeper this practice goes, the more you stop needing credit. You stop tracking who said what, who got what, who was thanked. The need to be acknowledged fades, not because you don't care, but because you no longer use praise to define yourself. This is the sacred release of ego, not a loss, but a homecoming. The return to a quieter truth beneath identity. A truth that doesn't need fixing, that doesn't compare, that doesn't rise and fall based on opinion. It simply exists, unshaken, unnamed, free. And now that the mountain has bowed, strong, still, and surrendered, what rises next is not force. It is not heaviness. It is not another burden to carry. What rises is lightness, not as a denial of difficulty, but as a way to meet it, not as escape, but as a new way of holding life. There is something inside that floats even when everything else sinks. It is not naive. It is not careless. It is the feather that floated anyway. In Buddhist teaching, lightness is not the absence of responsibility. It is the refusal to carry what was never yours to begin with. It is the clarity to release what cannot be controlled, and the wisdom to stop squeezing meaning out of every outcome. Lightness is not about ignoring what matters. It is about trusting that clinging does not help. It is a spiritual skill, one that must be practiced again and again until it becomes how you move. Overwhelm comes from pressure, from believing that every detail must be managed, every person must approve, every outcome must go your way. The mind loops, the breath tightens, and soon it feels like everything depends on your effort. But lightness shows another path. It says, what if you release the grip? What if you show up fully and then let go? Letting go of outcomes is not a lack of care. It is care without tension. You still give, you still try, but you stop tying your peace to the result. You water the plant, but you don't yell at it to grow. You speak your truth, but you don't force others to accept it. You act with heart, and then you let it breathe. This way of being unhooks the nervous system, because most exhaustion is not physical, it's emotional weight. Worrying about what people think, replaying the past, rehearsing the future. Lightness steps in and says, carry only what's real. Let the rest float by. You begin to notice how often heaviness is self-imposed. Thoughts like, I should be further along. I can't mess this up. They must understand me. Each one adds weight, not because it's true, but because you believe it without question. Lightness questions. It asks, is this really mine? Do I need to hold this? Can I put it down? This doesn't make you shallow. It makes you agile. Like a bird flying through wind, you adjust without collapsing. You're no longer trying to control the sky. You're learning how to ride it. That's not weakness. That's freedom. In Buddhism, detachment is not apathy. It is spaciousness. It's the realization that your inner world doesn't have to collapse every time the outer world shifts. You can experience loss without losing yourself. You can feel pain without becoming pain. You can care deeply without being dragged under. This kind of lightness begins with awareness. You pause. You notice when the mind gets heavy, when it starts rehearsing conflict, clinging to control, or building stories around failure. And instead of following it, you take a breath. You let the thought go unanswered. You don't fight it. You don't feed it. Soon, lightness becomes a way of walking. You move through your day with more ease. You stop rushing. You smile without needing a reason. You make decisions without the endless second-guessing. You laugh at your mistakes, not because they don't matter, but because you've stopped identifying with them. Even in grief, lightness can exist, not as denial, but as breath. As the moment when you remember you don't have to carry it all alone. As the quiet realization that the heart can still expand, even when it hurts. That's the paradox of spiritual lightness. It does not erase pain. It allows pain to pass through. This lightness also brings clarity, because when you are not buried in expectation, you can actually see what's happening. You hear what's being said, not what your ego feared. You notice what matters, not just what demands attention. Lightness clears the dust so truth can be seen. You don't need to pretend life is easy. You need to stop believing that heaviness makes you more responsible, more virtuous, more real. The culture often glorifies stress, but Buddhism teaches that tension is not depth. It's just tension. And peace is not laziness. It's sanity. The feather floats not because the wind is kind, but because it does not resist. It doesn't try to force direction. It doesn't cling to where it landed yesterday. It meets the moment with trust. And that trust becomes its flight. This practice invites you to start letting go in small ways. You drop the need to explain yourself. You stop checking who approved. You take a walk without planning what it means. You eat without a podcast playing. These moments seem small, but they teach the body that life doesn't need to be so heavy to be meaningful. The more you lean into lightness, the more you start laughing again. Not as escape, as resilience. Laughter is the sound of release. It means the grip has loosened, that you're no longer defined by what's going wrong, that you're not afraid of being seen without your armor. Lightness helps you love better, because you're no longer using relationships to prove something. You love without chains. You give without scorekeeping. You allow space. And that space becomes safety for both of you. Even in work, lightness matters. You do your best, but you stop building your identity on success. You meet deadlines without living in anxiety. You let your worth be something deeper than productivity. You rest when you're tired, not when everything's done. This doesn't make you careless, it makes you wise. Because when your mind isn't carrying extra weight, you have more energy to show up. You become more present, more creative, more grounded. The mind that is light is also clear. Buddhist detachment doesn't mean giving up. It means stepping back far enough to see clearly. It means releasing the emotional demand that things go a certain way in order for you to be okay. When you stop bargaining with life, life stops feeling like a negotiation. It starts to feel like a gift. The more you practice this, the more natural it feels. Letting go stops being a choice. It becomes your reflex. You hear bad news and you breathe. You face disappointment and you soften. You feel overwhelmed and you step back. This is the muscle of lightness, and it can be trained. Lightness is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It is remembering that you are more than this moment, that your worth is not tied to performance, that your peace does not depend on outcomes, that your heart is not a vault for tension, but a sky for breath. And now, after walking through these timeless teachings, one breath at a time, one release at a time, what remains isn't noise or pressure or the need to become someone new. What remains is space. Space to feel, space to rest, space to finally be at peace with what is. You've journeyed through emptiness not as a void, but as safety. You've met the flame of clinging and learned how to hold warmth without being burned. You've stepped into silence not as absence, but as presence. You've floated with impermanence, softened into surrender, witnessed your emotions without judgment, and grown roots in stillness. You learned to drop the mask, to see the self clearly, to release the chase for outcomes, to forgive what hurt you and what hurt through you. You returned to your breath as a home. You extended kindness inward and let conflict untie itself. You touched the deep calm of equanimity. You dropped striving. You welcomed your shadow. You listened to the quiet. You rested your soul in now. You bowed. You floated. You held grief with light. And through it all you remembered, peace does not need to be found, it needs to be felt. If these teachings soothed something in you, even for a moment, share your reflection in the comments. Let others know what part of this journey spoke to your heart. And if this brought stillness to your night or insight to your path, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another moment of calm wisdom. This space is here for you, always. Until next time, may you sleep deeply, wake gently, and carry peace wherever you go.